makes sense that you needed to support it with
Yeah.
that number of questions. But I also appreciated too the nature of the questions. It was not exactly as I expected, and it definitely, like I said, was a thought-provoking exercise just to prepare. So I appreciate that.
Now I'm curious. Now I'm curious. What did you expect? What are the expectations for podcasts?
I guess I was thinking it would be more like a little bit. I was a little bit nervous that I would have to have like all of the M&As from the year memorized and know all the facts right off, like very more factual based, whereas you were looking for much more higher level perspectives, my own experiences, which is a lot easier to talk about off the cuff, obviously.
Mm. No, I don't. I mean, I think we should use podcasts, in my opinion, to talk more about personal experiences, about opinions, facts we can find easily these days with LLMs, with search engines. But what I'm more interested in is how do you perceive the industry? Where do you believe we have problems? This is something that I think LLMs can't deliver anytime soon. So we need people who understand industries, who gather information, then digest it, and then can point with the finger and say, look, we have a problem here. Nobody sees it right now, but we need to fix this to get a better outcome. And for me, this is podcasting.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to dive in.
Yeah, absolutely. We are live already. I hope.
All
Let
right.
me just give me just a second to check. Um, Sometimes it's rare, but sometimes the live streams don't stream. But no, we are fully live.
All
And
right.
let's dive into the questions straight away. For the listeners, let's start with this one. For the listeners, usually when they want to jump off very quickly, what are the three messages that you will dive deeper into this conversation they will miss?
Yeah, so I had to think about this one a little bit, and I wanted to kind of give you three very different take-home messages. So the first one is really focused on the biopharm industry that we cover. And I think with regard to the biopharm industry, we're at a critical crossroads. There are a number of macro headwinds, there's political changes going on, among just the shift in where the US sits, maybe in the global scheme of things with the rise of China and other competitors in the innovation game. And so there's a lot to unpack there. But basically, I think that we're at a critical juncture. And I think as we look toward the near, mid, and long-term future of US biopharma, there's any number of ways it could go based on what's happening right now. So that's something I definitely want to discuss. And then outside of biopharma, what I cover, there are two other things that I want to address. So one is alternative careers in science training. So I am a scientist by training. I went into a PhD program. I didn't finish. I'm one of those PhD dropouts that left with my master's to pursue another avenue. But I was very much a part of the academic science world for a long time. And there's no mention of anything but becoming a professor, a research professor, when you are in the thick of research. So whether that's jumping to journalism like I did or going to industry science, there are any number of different paths that scientists could take, and they need to be discussed more at an early stage of careers. And then thirdly, in my role in journalism as a member of the media, I think that is also at a critical junction right now. We'll talk about it a little bit more going forward, but just in terms of the role that media is playing in communicating what's going on, not just in the government, but also in the biopharma companies, because a lot of the information right now is coming from media reports, not directly from the government or the companies as it has historically.
Oh, really? Is this such a sharp shift that not government is issuing information, but media?
It is. Yeah, we actually did a report recently where there are an unprecedented number of leaks from the FDA and from HHS more broadly. I mean, just as recently as yesterday with the CDC director refusing to resign, then getting fired, like that was all coming from the media. And there
Mhm.
have been specific examples that we can get into with regard to how a particular drug application is faring or the potential players within the HHS that had a role in making those decisions. That's getting leaked to the media. And I think it probably has a lot to do with some discontent within HHS that more HHS employees with this knowledge are going to the media to raise awareness. But it makes it really challenging for biopharma companies, especially public ones that are beholden to their shareholders, to be prepared to answer questions if they haven't heard directly from the FDA that their application was rejected, but then they get a call from a journalist. Oh, I heard your application rejected, or the adcom was delayed, or whatever it is. they're caught on their back foot.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
do think it's a really hard time to be a leader in biopharma right now.
Yeah, I believe that it's always a little bit funny when you get the information from media before you got it from somebody else.
Hmm.
Is this a good development in your opinion, or is this something we rather need to work on? But what do you think about this?
I don't think it's a great development. I think that there are regulations in place for those communication pathways, and there's a reason for those. Again, so that the leaders can be prepared for their to respond to the many questions that will come from an FDA decision to their shareholders and others. Again, I think it probably has a lot to do with the upset at HHS right now. And so I think it's a reflection. So I think the communication leaks in themselves are not great, but I think it's a reflection of a not great situation as well at HHS. So I think across the board, it's not ideal the way that communication is happening. And I also think there's a problem within media. Like I think BioSpace is amazing. I will say that we do the best
You are the
journalism.
good guys.
Yeah, but and there are other good guys out there to be sure, but I do think there are a lot of publications that are not truly unbiased. And it is really hard for news consumers to know whether there's spin or straight up misinformation in a story that they're reading. So I think that the media, given that we're playing a larger and larger role in this conversation, we need to hold ourselves to a higher standard.
And then we have on top of that, just to add to your point, social media. And it's really sometimes interesting when you get one opinion and then the exact opposite in
Mhm.
high frequency. And so I sit often in the middle and think, so, okay, now I have two opposing opinions and nothing in between. So what's right? Is this completely misinformation, or how do you see the role of social media in that?
It's really hard because social media, what it can do is it can amplify minority voices. And this has been a discussion in journalism for a long time. Like you want to give weight to both sides of the story. But the one that I remember very clearly coming up in journalism, 15, 20 years ago is climate change, right? So you got the climate change deniers out there. Do we give them equal weight in the story? And, the answer is no. The answer is we don't because it's a minority viewpoint that is not rooted in the science. And the vast majority of the scientific community agrees the climate is changing and that it is due to things that humans are doing, right? So it would be unfair, it would be biased journalism to give equal weight to those two viewpoints. The ideal of journalism is to give proportional weight to the different viewpoints that are out there. And so I think that social media does a fantastic job of amplifying voices across the board, but that means it's amplifying the minority viewpoints. And so it becomes harder and harder to suss out what's the proportionate weight we should be giving to the different opinions that are out there.
Yeah, I totally agree. The complicated question or the complex question behind it is then who decides who is right and who is not right. This is when we talk about opinions. As long as we are on the opinion side, it's you can have an opinion, another one can have a different opinion. But when someone starts framing it, okay, this is right, this is wrong, and most problems are complex by nature.
Right.
So who is the one who says this is right, this is wrong? Well, how should we do that these days? I mean, in the past it was media and politicians and leaders, and now we have social media, and everybody can basically be loud enough. What is your solution for that?
You have to look to their expertise. And so this came up regularly in my kind of first role in journalism was more on the basic science side, kind of a lot of academic science.
Mhm.
And we were really cautious to not, so we would talk to the academics, the researchers who, found this great discovery. Again, basic biology at the level of petri dishes in labs, or maybe we've got some mouse work going on, but we're nowhere near humans, right? But the point of this research is certainly within the biomedical realm is to have future applications for human health. And so the scientists like to espouse on what their little finding means for human patients. And what we had to be very careful of is you're not an expert in that. You're an expert in the molecular pathways and this particular thing that's going on. You're not a doctor. So we had to then turn to doc. If we wanted a perspective on how might this actually impact patients down the line, we would have to talk to doctors. So that's just one example. But I think with any issue, you have to look to the person's expertise, and they may want to talk about all levels of the problem, but you need to focus. The commentary that I would take from them and put into a story I would publish is where I feel they are expert and qualified to comment.
Yeah, that's a good way. When we look at biopharma today, what's on your mind? What is currently hot in the space?
So much. I think at the broadest level, what I have been thinking about a lot is the US's place within biopharma. And I think there are a number of reasons that this has been on my mind. It's obviously a part of the political conversation right now. It kind of dovetails too with the national security discussions that we can get into as well, but just strictly on um, the US maintaining its kind of place as a leader in biomedical innovation. I think that's at risk. And I think that a lot of people would agree with me about that. And then in parallel, you've got other nations that are rising in their biomedical innovation prowess. So you've got these two factors that really affect down the line who's going to be the leader. And I think historically, US really has been the leader. We kind of birthed the biotech industry and maintained that dominance. And I know that a lot of people have wanted to come to the US for that reason. And now there are a lot of factors that could be sending people elsewhere. And so, yeah, another risk to maintaining that kind of first position.
Yes, no, totally agree. US was definitely the place to go for biopharma. Europe graciously held back and did not do as much as would have been possible. But I think currently the political situation is not very much in favor of pharma. So it's not high on the priority list at the end of the day. And what I heard from the US, prices will be cut. I mean, it's on the first look, it's beneficial for the patient. But when you think a little bit deeper and into the problem, um, high prices attracted always the best innovation to the US. And the place that brought new therapies first to the patient was basically the US in the past.
Mhm.
And when you start cutting prices, you cut R&D budgets. But what are the downstream effects that you see currently that puts the number one role of the US in danger?
I think at a long term, and maybe one of the biggest risks, so I'll start there, is the cuts to early stage basic research.
Mm.
So I think that it's a little bit outside of our purview focused on biopharma because it's not going to hit immediately. But if we start undercutting all of the innovation and discoveries that pour into the sector, then in 10, 15, 20 years time, we're not going to have those basic discoveries, those new targets, those new molecules to then develop and put through the clinic. So I think that's a huge risk. I think another risk is the drug pricing rhetoric right now. Like you said, it really has driven innovation. We've always been a competition-based system, and it's really worked. It's worked in terms of leading in innovation. It hasn't worked in terms of delivering the treatments needed to patients, and that's where drug pricing needs to be a real point of discussion. But I would probably argue that that falls more on other parts of our healthcare system than on biopharma specifically. Our payer system is an absolute mess, and the way the incentives are totally misaligned. There's a lot of problems, right? I'm not denying that there are problems, but I don't think that like having pharma companies just cut their prices is necessarily the solution because that's going to undercut innovation as well.
Mm. I love your honesty. It's just a mess. So it's really clear statements. I really loved it. I really loved
Okay,
it.
good. I'll keep it up.
Yeah, keep going. Um, let's come back later to the systemic issues. Let's walk through the questions for the opening. Your career is also something that we will discuss in this episode. But why did you walk away from basic research, from basic science? What was your motivation to say, no, I want to do something different? Why journalism?
So I'll be honest, I went to grad school to procrastinate that decision of what do I want to be when I grow up. I didn't know. I didn't think I wanted to be a research professor, but I didn't know. And in science, they pay you to go to school, and I loved school, and I also really loved learning. And so I was just kind of a perpetual student for as long as I could be. And then it was while I was in grad school, so I went to IU in Bloomington, studied seahorse mating behavior, evolutionary biology, very fascinating stuff to me. But I was at the same time that I was doing my research, I was researching what do I actually want to be when I grow up. So it came actually at a friend's wedding. I was chatting with a kindergarten classmate I hadn't seen in 20 years, and we were talking about, our career paths. And I was like, I don't know, I'm in grad school. This is what I'm studying. I still haven't figured it out. He asked me about my hobbies. I was like, well, I love to write. He's like, well, you should do science writing. I was like, science writing? Is that a thing? Like, I honestly had not heard of this concept of science writing. I was like, well, I love science and I love writing. So that was it. That's all it took for me. And I was sold. I dove fully in. I took a couple of journalism classes, undergrad classes while I was in grad school. became a member of the National Associations of Science Writers. I went to that conference, networked my heart out, and then I had a terrible field season where I went back to the same place I had been the previous year, but didn't find a single seahorse. So that was a little bit of a disaster. It would have added at least a year to my PhD. And I was like, okay, now's the time to pull the trigger. I defended a master's. I applied to something like 20 internships, and I landed one at the Scientist, which is where I spent the first 14 years of my career. So I got very lucky in taking that internship, and then that turned into a job right away. But all it took for me to make the leap was to find that idea, because I knew I was looking for something. So I think in some ways that's a little bit easier than going into research thinking that's your career and then having to pivot. That's going to be a little bit more. That's going to take a lot more reflection and thought. For me, as soon as I found it, I was sold, hook, line, and sinker. I was ready.
Hmm. I mean, when I remember the 90s, when I was in science, it's basically the natural progression is you're a student, you graduate, you do a PhD, and you get in all these roles, and this is pretty much laid out. When people then do something else, it's not very, so I would say very welcomed in the scientific community, especially when it involves not doing a PhD. So there's basically nobody telling people that there are other careers and you could do something else. How was it for you in this situation to make a decision where you say, okay, I'm in the academic field, I'm in an academic environment, everybody talks about where is your postdoc, when is your PhD finished, what are you going to do?
Mhm.
And you said, no, I do something different. How was that for you to make this pivot that is basically going against groupthink?
I was very fortunate in that I was very well supported by my advisor and the rest of my committee and everyone in my immediate circle at school. I mean, I basically just sat down with my advisor. I told him what I was thinking. I talked through all the specifics. I was like, if I crash and burn, what are my options for coming back? I had already advanced to candidacy. I'd already taken my prelims. So I was basically ABD, right? I needed more research, and then I would wrap up my dissertation. But I was well on my way. And so he basically explained to me that my candidacy stood for 10 years. So at any point in the next 10 years, I could come back to his lab and I could pick up where I left off. And that was really reassuring for me to be able to make that leap. And he was very supportive of me leaving when I did and taking my master's, even though I was in a program that wasn't catered to giving out masters. So again, I was incredibly well supported. I felt honestly a little bit more pressure with my parents. I
Really?
felt like I had to line everything up, like I'm going to drop out of school, but here's why, and here's what I have planned. And I had to convince them that it wasn't a bad decision, and I did not regret it. I mean, for me, it was what I wanted to do, and it was a good fit, and so that's really all that matters. But in the eyes of a parent, they also want to make sure that you're taking care of yourself and that you have a good livelihood. And I could say in that regard as well, a couple of years out of grad school, I was making twice as much money as my postdoc friends, right? Like postdocs are notoriously underpaid. Sometimes they last 5, 8, 10 years where you're stuck in this kind of grunt work part of your career. And what I did when I made the leap to journalism is I just started climbing the ladder, and I was able to move forward in a way that I think academics often get stuck. So I think even from that perspective, it was a good leap for me. And I definitely earned my parents' support for sure.
Yeah, there are enough other options on the market. This is really good. Why were your parents worried? I'm curious now.
Oh, I don't I think that they always pushed academic success. I went to a magnet high school. It was one of the best in the country at the time. And, my brother, he's told me that he drew pictures for the essay so he wouldn't have to go there, because if he'd gotten in, my parents would have made him go, right? Best education you can possibly get. And as a parent now myself, it's going to be hard not to be the same way. So it was just kind of instilled in me from a young age that academic and career success is a priority. And I was unsure of this leap. I didn't have, like you said, it's so uncommon to leap out of science, just like straight up research, into an alternative career, that I didn't have a lot of models of people who had done it successfully. And so it was just a little bit more of an uncertain path. And I think that reason alone was I was a little hesitant to approach my parents and tell them, and just the word dropout, that has a lot of connotations too. I am a dropout, and I say it with pride because I feel like it was the right decision for me. But parents don't love to hear that your kids are dropping out of school. It's just on the surface level, it doesn't sound great.
Yeah, but you're the Elon Musk of journalism then, at the end of the day. Um, isn't that amazing that, I mean, basic research is important in deep tech, basic research is important in biotech, but to bring a drug to the market at the end of the day, we need much more functions than just basic research. What I never understood in the industry is why is there so much focus on one core functions at the university level, and why do we not raise more awareness for the other functions that we need, preclinical development, clinical development, regulatory pathways, how to bring a drug to the market, what a customer is, the economics behind it, the business behind it. What's your opinion as a journalist? Why don't we emphasize that more?
I have no idea. And I think it's a huge failing of our educational system because I think all of those points you just raised are exactly what we should be teaching in grad school. I think it should be required like a biopharma 101, right? Just a basic, if you're going to go into grad school for science, especially in the biomedical sciences, you need to know what's going on in biopharma, how this research could be applied in the future. Even if you're going to stay in research as a research professor, I think you should have some insight into what's going on. And then certainly if you want to transition to industry, there should be a track in grad school to allow you to get a specialty or like some sort of minor at that level where you have some insight into how it works, all the different players. It's so complicated. I don't think anybody has a full understanding of the entire US healthcare system. There are too many different players from the actual scientists and biopharma to the payers to the PBMs to the pharmacies. Like it's too complicated. And there's zero education about that for our industry scientists. So
Yeah,
I don't know, when you answer your question, I don't know why it's not prioritized. And I actually feel very strongly that it should be.
yeah, I totally agree with that. I totally agree with that. And now we also have, I mean, when we look at journalism, now we have also the rise of LLMs. Um, and some might say journalism, who needs that? We have LLMs, and in the future, everything is researched by LLMs anyway. How do you see this danger? Is it danger or is it an opportunity, LLMs for journalism?
Both. I think that they could be very advantageous. I mean, AI is going to infiltrate all walks of life. It's interesting. I was just thinking about AI at a very high level recently, and I feel like I'm one of the last generations that remembers life before the internet. I grew up before internet, and then we got dial up into our home when I was maybe middle school aged, and so I remember what life was like before, and
Mhm.
I feel like we're on the cusp of the next revolution that's going to be at that scale. I think kids born today, like my daughter's 7, she might be one of the last ones to remember life before AI because AI is going to be everywhere. So I don't think journalism can avoid it. I think it is useful. I've started using it in little ways like research, that kind of thing. I think it's helpful for pointing you in the right direction for the bits and bobs that you're after. And so many of the engines right now are really helpful in sourcing their information. Perplexity is one of my favorites because like it gives me a summary, but then it sources everything. So then I still go to the original source to fact check. And so that's really helpful. Um, I have seen publications starting to do whole articles generated by AI and then edited and fact checked. And I've seen the ones that disclose it. There are probably more out there that haven't
Mhm.
disclosed it. I'm a little bit more old school when it comes to that, and I'm trying to stay open-minded. I find that would not be any more efficient because the amount of editing or the amount of input I'd have to put into the model, either that or the amount of editing I have to do when it came out, would be so like it would be quicker for me to just write it. I feel the same. I've got some colleagues in other fields, so not colleagues, friends in other fields who use AI to like draft their emails to employees or let them down, from a job application, nice, all these things. And again, so I've thought about this. I was like, should I be more efficient? Could I be writing my emails with Chat GPT? But the amount of information I would need to put into Chat GPT to write exactly the email that I want, I'm so particular about what I want to say, might as well just write the email, right?
Mhm.
So I have not yet found a lot of uses for it, but this is something I'm really actively thinking about. In my social reels, I get these ads that like I'm gonna fall behind in my professional life if I don't figure out how to use AI. And I think to some degree it's right. So I've like started toying with the idea I need to take like a class and how better to capitalize on these technologies. So it's something I'm thinking about, but I don't have a lot of answers for you right now. I honestly don't use it a ton yet, but I know it's a really valuable tool. And especially as it matures, I do need to start exploring it a bit more.
No, it's definitely helpful at the end of the day. Sourcing is not a strength of ChatGPT, for example. It's always funny when they cite sources and then you get some study, and
Yeah.
most of the studies are not even existing. So it's not really good. I think LLMs are good for creativity. So when I write emails and I think, is there a way to say it harsher? Is there a way to say something politer? Make 10 suggestions. Show me the scale between harsh and politeness and
Okay.
what's in between. This is really helpful, but I totally agree to what you say. I mean, once you have it and you say, okay, I write these emails always in this style, then you don't need LLM. And
Yeah.
this is not beneficial. Sourcing different.
Creativity is that's a good point. The other way I've used it, which is in line with your point, is it just helps you be creative, is workshopping headlines. So I have a headline, I have a
Yeah.
story, the news story is written, and I've got a pretty good idea of it. I was like, give me some news headlines for this article, and I paste it in there. And I've never just taken one straight that it's given me, but it does give me some work. I mean, it's like a very advanced thesaurus, basically. It was like, here's this thing, help me recraft it, rather than, actually control F or F7, whatever the keyboard shortcut is for thesaurus for each individual word. You can kind of do a thesaurus search for the whole headline or for the whole article. So it can definitely spark some ideas that way.
It's a brainstorming team in your
Hmm.
pocket, and it's good for team health to not bother the colleagues all the time with a, I have an idea. Can you give me five more?
Yes, exactly, exactly. We move our workshopping headlines from the Teams chat to Chat GPT.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, how do you approach writing? What is your style? What is your craft that you bring to scientific writing?
My personal writing style, and this goes for all writing, not just my professional writing, I vomit on the page and then I edit the hell out of it. I am an editor through and
Mhm.
through. I feel like I'm a much stronger editor than I am writer. I'm a decent writer, I think. But it doesn't come out that way on the first try. So I just write, I put everything that I want in it. Often when I'm writing like a feature, I'll take all of my sources and notes and put them all in the same document and then work through and kind of write and write and write at a like pretty quick pace. Like, let's just get it on the page. Then you start to structure it, you get it all there. And then I edit, I self edit so much before I even submit the first draft. So the first draft that I would send to an editor is like my 10th or plus draft, right? I've really worked hard on it. So that's very different for different people. But for anyone, I would say if we're looking to give bits of advice here, for anyone who struggles with writing and struggles to put words on a page, take this approach. Don't stress about how good it is. Just get it on the page and then go back and clean it up. It's just, and I enjoy the editing process even more than the writing process. The writing process is a little bit overwhelming. There's so much information. How do I organize it? But then when I edit it and I'm refining it, it's like, I don't know if you get a little bit of a natural high from a major clean out in your house, right? It's the same sort of idea. It was a mess and you cleaned it up, and I like that.
This is a great framing. So you're absolutely not stressed out that your first version is not the best, that you
No.
need to edit it, and that it takes time.
Yep.
And you don't look back to the first version and say, why did I have to do all this editing?
Nope. Nope.
What's
I mean, and it really accelerates the writing process too. So it is a time-consuming process to self-edit, but I'm so fast on the writing side because I don't stress about it, just get it on the page. So the
makes
majority of my
sense.
time is spent just refining what I've put on paper.
So your process is you have an idea, you sit down, computer, or is it handwriting?
Computer, yeah.
Computer.
I still
And
journal like personal stuff. I will still journal, but
really,
I have to just do it. I don't want to have to then transcribe it later, so I just do it right on the computer.
you still use handwriting in journaling?
For journaling, yeah, just for personal stuff. But I'm so much faster typing that if I'm gonna like be writing a story, and especially if I'm writing a reported story and I've got all my interview notes and also writing for work, I'm also constantly Googling things and looking at press releases and finding those facts, right? Versus the reason I still use pen and paper for journaling is it's just me in my mind. So I can just sit there and there is a nice feel to pen on paper, but I've never used that professionally. I mean, I only came to journalism in 2009. So definitely well into the age of everything's online.
What's the difference for you writing with pen and paper and computer? What is it doing to you?
Um, I guess so, right. It's for me, it's so different because I do it for different things. Like I'm either doing journalism or I'm journaling. So there's that inherent difference. But then in terms of the actual act, I guess there's just more of a stream of consciousness with it, with handwriting. Yeah, it's almost like thinking out loud when I'm writing in a journal, right? Not out loud, but writing thinking on paper. Whereas when I'm working on a computer, it's crafting the entire story, even if it's a mess, but it's getting it all there. A lot of and then moving whole chunks. A big part of my process with writing slash editing is moving it around to structure it. That's something I really specialized in my last role. I edited a lot of scientist written features, and scientists, God love them, can't usually write very well. So I would really have to rework what they would send me, and it was just dragging and dropping whole bits of things. So that's not paper is not really conducive to that level of editing that I like to do on the computer.
Yeah, that's true. You mentioned the term stream of consciousness, and as you said it, I always think about Twitter or X, meanwhile, where people say, okay, Twitter is a stream of consciousness. You just think and write and don't overthink it. Your process is basically your stream of consciousness is the first version, and then you edit it, and then you present it to the public. And probably your first stream of consciousness is private. How do you see this movement to put everything online, every single thought, every emotional rush?
I guess I don't have a strong opinion on it for what others do. I would have to give that a little more thought. I don't think it's inherently bad or inherently good. Scares me. I do not feel comfortable doing it. I edit even my social posts. I edit to death, right? Like I will even after I push publish, I'm like, oh wait, I'm gonna tweak this. I'm a little bit. I think there's a little bit of a public speaking dimension to social media that I am not as comfortable with as maybe some others out there. I was actually talking about this with my colleague recently. I feel very confident in social settings. I'm a pretty outgoing social person. And when I meet people, I can walk into a party, I can small talk. I'm very comfortable in that setting. But as soon as there's a hidden audience, like right now, I know we have an audience, then I can't see them and I can't see their reaction and I can't see how they're judging me. And I get some level of discomfort from that. And I feel social media is
Really?
similarly. I'm putting myself out there to an audience that I can't see. So it's very different than just interacting socially, which I do feel comfortable with. We were having this conversation. She was the reverse. She was more confident putting herself out there, but a little bit less confident in those small social settings. So, I mean, it's very personality based. So again, I don't have an opinion on a high level about people who tend to kind of display every bit of emotion on social media, but it's definitely not for me.
Then thanks for joining my show because we don't see the people. So is it really you feel more comfortable on stage when you see thousands of people standing in front of you than being in a Zoom call where you know, okay, there are some probably 1, 2, 3,000 people listening into this conversation at some point in time. This is more uncomfortable for you than the
I
stage
think they're
situation.
equally uncomfortable, equally,
Okay,
because
well,
in a large audience, I'm also not able to see directly their
mm,
expressions and interactions and judgment. So what I am comfortable with is walking into a party where I know no one. That's not a problem for me. I can see them, we're interacting, we're talking, I can kind of read them a little bit. That to me is different than either standing on stage with an audience or here with a audience that I can't see. Both are people are watching me and I don't have a full sense of what they're taking away and it makes me a little uncomfortable. But it's definitely a personal goal to stretch in this area. So I appreciate the invitation to this podcast.
yeah, no, it's an interesting development when I think, I mean, I can relate to what you say. In the 90s, the normal process was write your thoughts down in private, polish your thoughts, and then you can present it to the public. And now it's just like everything immediately online and discuss it with people. And I mean, I get the point. It helps refine your own thought process early. So you're less at risk going into a wrong route. But on the other hand, every emotion is online. And this is something where people always said to me, don't do it.
Yeah. I think for me the happy medium is to still be open to changing your views and your perspectives and your plan after you put it out there, but not putting it out there till you've already self-refined a little bit. Like I think there's something to just thinking. I mean, even again, bringing it back to house projects, I'm definitely in the house mindset right now. I have all these different ideas for how I want to fix up the house. And before I go to my husband and present these ideas, I've got to workshop them myself, refine them, actually believe in an idea, and then bring it to him. Say, okay, this one I'm sure, because otherwise I'm going to change my mind in 5 minutes and it's just wasting his time. So it's the same idea here. I think refine your ideas to some degree. Don't just put anything out there into the ether. But then when I do put it out there, don't have thought through it so much that I'm rigid and refuse to change. Like I've got this idea, I thought it through, I'm ready because new perspectives are always going to give you new ideas and you have to be open to incorporating those ideas into whatever you're working on. So I think there's probably a balance here, as with everything.
Yeah, and for this refining process, I think LLMs have a role. It's not that public, it's more a private space, but
Mhm.
it's good for just pitching ideas or going through ideas, running through ideas, refining ideas, which I
That's
love doing.
interesting. Yeah.
Well, when we go back to scientific writing,
Yeah.
what I always find impressive with US-based writers, they always bring in a perspective of a person. They always describe very clearly the humans involved in the process. Whereas when I look at the European scene, it's more neutral. It's the company A, it's the company B. And looking at articles from the US, maybe I'm just biased from the European side. But what I perceive is you always write about humans. Why is the human story so important for US writers?
That's interesting. I hadn't noticed the continental divide there, but I certainly do value the human stories in everything that I've ever written. Even if it doesn't make it into the final draft, like that is where naturally I go because we're all humans and it's at the most basic level. It's how you form connection and writing stories that people care about is giving them some sort of connection. So I think if you take it too high level and you just talk about what the companies are doing and remove it from the people who are running those companies, it's harder to connect with. And then certainly in the biomedical space, you also want to be thinking about the patients and these are real people. And so when things happen. Sarepta is a great example, and it was really dramatic in terms of, how the news came out, how the FDA responded to the news. But what was missed at first, I think, and what started to come out was how the patients are being affected, and they really should be number one at all times in this industry, and unfortunately, they're not.
Where does this flow come from? I mean, naturally, this I always thought pharma must be patient-centric and was so surprised when I've joined the biotech industry in 2006 that bringing up the customer at the end of the day was something almost nobody thought about early in the research. Why is there such a disconnect, in your opinion?
I think it's because it's such an expensive endeavor and you're having to fundraise from wide swaths of investors and stakeholders, and they have a priority of getting their money back. Companies are beholden to shareholders. VC firms and other investors are beholden to their investors who gave them money to invest elsewhere, right? So the money is such a big part of this industry that it's very easy for that to overtake the patients. And I think that it needs to be a consideration from the beginning. How do you make this therapy that seems to be working from a scientific viewpoint? Will it work from a commercial standpoint? Because that's just as important to actually getting it to the patients you want to help. Because I mean, it's just we're talking billions upon billions of dollars here.
Mhm.
People that's going to play a role in any culture, in any community. When you're talking a lot of money, money is going to be driving the conversation.
I'm coming from the business perspective, and my education was always clear you have to think from the customer backwards. And in pharma, you can burn a lot of money developing something that you get never into the healthcare system. And when you can't convince doctors to use a drug or a therapy,
Mhm.
you don't get it to the patients. And it can be the best drug in the world. If it that just doesn't fit into the lifestyle of patients, it's not successful. And yet we still postpone talking about patients endlessly.
Yeah, it is definitely something that has been kind of back burner. Like there are more important things to think about. It's been a constant kind of low rumbling of a conversation like, oh, we should bring patients more into the drug development process. We should be in patient groups. We're actually working on a story right now about some of these patient groups that are advocating for this and some of the companies that are turning and involving. So it's not absent. It does exist.
Mhm.
It's just not the norm. And so I agree. It really needs to be more of the norm. I think as patient advocacy grows, it's really grown tremendously over the last, I mean, decades at this point, but it's really kind of taken off since the advent, pharma is much older, I would say, than patient advocacy. So now the patient advocacy is really establishing itself as a mature area. I think that we'll see more and more of it and hopefully be moving in the right direction. But at this point, you're right. It's still patients are kind of an afterthought.
Now, I'm curious, before we dive into the challenges of 2025 and where the industry stands, I'm curious about your perspective on the history of the pharmaceutical industry
Hmm.
in a quick run through. How do you see the history of the pharmaceutical industry?
So I dove into this when I first started here at BioSpace because I really just wanted to position myself. Like I was newer to the industry, and so I wanted to figure out what do other people know. And I went really deep because I think that biopharma, as we know it today, is so young. It's a super, super young industry, and it has so much more maturation to go before it's at the level of these more mature industries like automotive and anything else, any other major industry. Biopharma is young, and pharma is not. Pharma is 150 plus years old, but biotech is young, and biopharma as a full ecosystem is therefore young. So my view of the high level view of the history of pharma is you've got these big names that were founded in the late 1800s, early 1900s. They did in-house drug development, small molecules, like the original regulatory frameworks were all built up around this. And these were these like big pharma was coined, and these are the big pharma powerhouses. And then 70s, I think, was Genentech, 70s, certainly into
Mhm.
the 80s. That's when we really started seeing these biotechs come online. And from then till now, so over the last 50 years, we've seen this incredible evolution of how drugs are developed. And now pharmas are largely not doing their own in-house research. They're buying up from the biotechs. It's changed the nature of the money. And again, follow the money. Where does the money go? It's changed nature because you're getting these smaller biotechs having to fundraise, and they're riskier investments, but they're smaller investments, right? So and then big pharma comes in, big pharma is historic, risk averse. It's I'm kind of trying to pull in too many threads here at once, but basically, I think that the fact that drug development has moved towards the smaller companies and big pharma has, in some ways, become more of like the finisher and take it to market and market it and sell it. It's it's changed what pharma is from what it was when it was founded, and it's made biopharma as a whole just a brand new thing. Like it's a brand new industry that is still like kind of finding its footing and finding its way in this world. And I think that's why it's no surprise that maybe US was the clear leader at first because it was just so new and so young. And so now these other nations are really figuring it out, and they've established their own biotech communities that are not surprisingly really good at what they do. There's a lot of smart people all over the world. The US is not unique in this. And so it's I think just the fact that it is so young means that the race for who's going to be the best is it's like this is a marathon, not a sprint, and we're at like the very
Mhm.
beginning of it.
Yeah, I totally agree. So to make sure that we are talking about the same thing, what's your definition that you use for biopharma?
So
What's
I like to
included,
use
what's not
this
included?
is good. This is good. I like to use the word biopharma as a catch-all because I think the words pharma and biotech are often misused,
Mhm.
including by us. Like I've kind of just adopted the misuse. It's one of those, and I hate this because I'm such a language nerd, but one of those things that's been misused enough that now it's accepted usage. So technically, like if you look at Merriam-Webster, you're going to see pharma is small molecules, it's pharmaceuticals, and biotech is biotechnology, cell therapies, gene therapies, all these new modalities. But colloquially, the way we use these words, pharma are the big companies, biotech are the small companies. There's plenty of pharma who are doing biotechnology, and there's plenty of biotechs who are working on small molecules. So I use biopharma to avoid this mess. And so if you ask me what is biopharma, it is the industry of drug development.
That includes the big companies, the
Mhm.
small companies, the medium-sized companies,
Yep.
market access, regulatory aspects,
Hmm.
basic research. So
Yep.
basically the whole value chain. And you're agnostic to whether it's a small molecule, cell therapy, biologics, whatever. So
Yes,
this
those
is
all
the
fall
whole,
under biopharma. Yeah.
but not medical devices. You exclude that.
That's interesting. So we at BioSpace don't cover medical devices. So I'm not as expert in that. I mean, certainly there are plenty of biopharma companies that touch in this space. So I don't know if I could really fully exclude it. I do exclude it because it's not part of my coverage purview. But I don't know if I would exclude it from like the word, like from how I would define the word. Diagnostics too is an area that we don't really go into, but
Mhm.
it's certainly relevant to all of this space. So yeah, I actually don't know where I would fall on whether med tech is part of biopharma. I think kind of is probably. I mean, it's all part of delivering health services in developing health services that can be delivered to patients. So yeah, I think it's probably all part and parcel to it. So it's not just drugs, it's also tech and diagnostics and, you know, the works.
Yeah, it was more clear cut 10 years ago, but now we have artificial intelligence, and artificial intelligence gets integrated in drug development. And I see also a lot of convergence in diagnostics to make sure that
Sure.
the therapy really selects the right patients. And
Right.
then you have LLMs. I have had a conversation with Raphael Rosengarten or Attila from Hungary. They're all using LLMs to better understand the biology and helping pharma companies or biopharma companies to understand whether their drugs work in patients or not. So it's everything is a little bit mixed up these days, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah. As we move towards more and more personalized medicine, then absolutely diagnostics are hand in hand with drug development.
Life was easier 30 years ago. It was not so
In
complex.
some ways, in some ways.
That's true in some ways.
You could also get polio and, you know, not do very well. So like I feel like we've really advanced in terms of public health on a basic scale. Like maternal mortality is another great example. Like you can have a baby and not be scared to have a baby these days, which is
Mm.
amazing. But yes, in terms of defining and clearly delineating the different sectors of the industry, much more complicated these days.
Yeah, we have a huge convergence of industries, especially in the last 10 years, in my
Mhm.
opinion, where people just use different concepts from different industries, bring it together and create something new. It's artificial intelligence is the best example for my life.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I would agree.
When we look at what I found interesting, what you mentioned about the position of pharma companies or bigger corporations and smaller corporations, where do you see the advantage in the current economic model that we run in the industry?
I think I think the advantage is that science will continue even in the face of these macro headwinds because we have the small, scrappy biotech world. If it was just left up to pharma, they're so risk averse. You know, they're facing patent cliffs, they're facing tariffs, they're facing drug pricing regulation. There's all these things. And, you know, again, they're beholden to their shareholders and they want to, you know, continue to not just make money, but make more money, right? And so I feel like we would be more at risk of innovation and early stage research kind of shutting down when we get to these challenging economic moments in time, and economic and political moments in time. Whereas biotech, I mean, it's not easy to be in biotech right now, but they're not stopping either. Like you're still going to see those biotechs forming. You're still going to see those early, you know, Series A, Series B. These raises are coming out. It's still there. They're still and they're there because of the people who are there. They have a vision. They're excited by their science and what it can do for the patients. There is where I feel like in the smaller biotech world is where patients still are often a focus, and I love that. And I think that they are nimble enough and they see the need that some economic or political or financial challenges aren't going to stop them. Whereas I feel like with the bigger companies, they might be more like, okay, let's just ride this out. Let's stick with what we, you know, stay with what we have for now. And then when things pick back up, we'll dive back in. And then you can't have that like lack of continuity for drug development. You constantly need to have the stuff in the early stages feeding that pipeline. So I think biopharma structure the way it is now is an advantage for stability through these kind of ups and downs of the macro trends that we're seeing.
I totally agree. It's not so easy to change course with a large corporation.
Right.
Just takes more time. Smaller corporations or a lot of smaller corporations are much more flexible. They can adapt much faster. When five companies don't work, you shut them down, create 10 new companies, and then find out does it work in that environment? And if not, you create the next batch of 10 companies and you can play around more and adapt, be more flexible. It's
Yeah,
really
exactly. And that
advantage.
that holds across industries. Like I've seen it in journalism. I have now worked for two relatively small publications, and I love it because we are a lot more nimble than some of our bigger competitors, and we can adjust and change our dynamics without going through many layers of bureaucracy to institute changes.
And what I found interesting while you were speaking, I mean the change or the speed of change in the last years. 2010 in biotech and biopharma was really tough. here in Europe. Then it became a little bit better up to 2015. 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19 was great. Investments went up also in the US, and glorious times in 2020, 2021,
Hmm.
2022. Also, I think beginning of 2022, a lot of capital, a lot of money pouring in the industry. And then it was like the show suddenly stopped somewhere in 2022. How do you see in 2025 the attitude in the entire industry? Are we through the worst, or should we expect worse times?
I think that's kind of anyone's guess at this point. So after that COVID bubble burst and those tourist investors fled and layoffs skyrocketed, bankruptcy skyrocketed, like we hit the hard times in 2022 going into 2023. I think that there was this perpetual optimism after that. Like I remember back to JPM 2024. Cautious optimism. We're going to go on the right rate. And then by the end of 2024, 2024 wasn't the year we were hoping it would be. Same thing again in 2025. First big deal that we've seen in over a year with J&J buying Intracellular. All right, M&As are back. Lots of optimism. 2025 is the year. And now, especially with the political state in the US and all the changes going on, it's not looking like 2025 is the year. So I feel like we're stuck right now as an industry in wishful thinking and not actual rebound. Like
Mm,
we have not rebounded from the bursting of the COVID bubble, but man, do we really, really want to. But really, really wanting to isn't enough, right? There has to be actual substantive changes at the level of political stability and regulatory stability and investor interest, right? I think a lot of we can get into it more when we get into the specifics, but it's just causing investors to not want to invest, right? Like they need stability and certainty, not instability and uncertainty, to be throwing millions and billions of dollars into technologies. So I think right now we have not rebounded, and honestly, I don't see it happening this year.
mm. Let's create a time capsule for 2025 and start with instability and insecurity on the market. What's your opinion? Where does it come from?
I mean, I think a lot of it's coming from HHS right now. I think there's a lot of uncertainty about what the administration will do, what they will decide, who will decide it, right? There's still constant turnover of top leadership as recently as last night, right? Like this is the regular story. And so until we know who's going to be in charge and making the decisions and what their goals and strategies and platforms are, it's really hard to predict. So I'm hoping that settles down. I'm hoping that Kennedy gets a staff of HHS agency leaders that he's happy with, and then they can start putting out clear and consistent guidance for drug makers. At this point, it hasn't happened, and there are plenty of examples out there where drug makers are just baffled. Rejections coming down after they were lockstep with the FDA for all the months leading up to the PDUFA or whatever it is. Like there's just it's anyone's guess in some ways. And that in itself, especially with like the tariffs. So the tariffs have been, the big talk since
Big
January, and it's
surprise.
been right threats. And then, everything the president says sends the industry kind of in motion, like, oh no, here they come, but then they don't come. And I heard an analyst say at some point, maybe a couple months ago at this point, but like worst case scenario isn't as bad as the uncertainty. So just give us the 250% tariff, whatever, like that was the sentiment. It was just like not knowing is so much harder than even challenging policies that are put up. Throw your hardest policies at us. Sure, we'll handle them. But threatening them and not knowing if or when they're coming, that's a really hard place for industry to be.
What does it do, in your opinion, with the people when you talk with decision makers in the industry? What's their reaction? What's the human reaction to uncertainty that you perceive?
Frustration, I think. I think they're eager to be able to communicate to their stakeholders. And if they can't get clarity from the powers that be above them, they can't provide that to their stakeholders. And so that puts leaders in a really tough position, kind of like a don't shoot the messenger situation. They're the messenger. And they either have bad news or they have I don't know as an answer. And nobody likes getting I don't know as an answer, right? So then they look bad, but it's not their fault. They don't know because they're not being told and they're not being given consistent, clear guidelines for what's expected of them. So it's just an impossible situation for leaders right now. I really feel. I mean, we one of my colleagues just put out a story yesterday on how hard it is to be a big pharma CEO, and I think there's a lot to discuss there. And then certainly at the level of biotechs, same sort of stories at a different scale and a different level and with some different nuances. But across biopharma, I'm glad I'm not a CEO.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I mean, isn't that interesting that humans, especially decision makers, can deal with tough decisions much better, even if it threatens the organization, than with uncertainty. This is something
Yes.
that I really fi- do you have an answer why it's so hard for humans to deal with uncertainty?
I mean, I think it's something natural, like you said, humans just struggle with uncertainty. I myself have always struggled with it, limbo. When we coming back, I'm gonna keep coming back to this house. We when we wanted to buy this house, it was going into short sale, or was in short sale. So we put an offer in, and for 4 months we just sat and waited. Like, are we gonna get this house or are we not? Right. And then it went into auction and we got it. And then there's all the chaos and stress of moving and planning. And I loved that. But the 4 months of sitting on my
Mhm.
hands and doing absolutely nothing killed me. So I think there's definitely this innate human discomfort with uncertainty. But I think in biopharma specifically, it is a real challenge. It's not just like a knee-jerk reaction from the leaders. It's a real challenge for short, mid, and long-term planning. And strategic planning is such a key part of biopharma, right? Because like you say, it's the business side of things. You may have the science that works, but if you're not strategic in how you develop and eventually market that therapy, you're going to crash and burn. Bluebird is the best example of this. Like they have therapies on the market and they couldn't survive, right? So there's so much more to the equation than just the good science that dealing with this uncertainty is a real challenge.
Yeah, especially in expensive industries like pharma, biopharma. I
Yep.
mean, the last numbers that I have is somewhere between $1 to $5 billion needed to bring a new therapy from the lab bench to the market to the patients.
Mm-hmm.
And the time is still 5 to 10 years. So you can't pivot when you make a mistake, you can't pivot from one day to the other. I mean, you burn basically 1 billion and 5 years minimum of development. And this is my opinion on uncertainty, why it's so hard in the industry,
That's true.
because you need to commit for 5 years minimum
Yeah.
and a few billions. And when then the regulations change and what you thought is possible is not possible anymore, then the question is, am I willing to do it again tomorrow?
Yeah.
And most of the time people say no.
Yeah. That long investment cycle makes it incredibly hard.
Yeah, and LLMs or SaaS is much shorter. I mean, you need for LLMs, you need also a lot of money, but you can pivot much faster than in pharma.
Yeah.
When we look at the pharmaceutical industry in 2025, you mentioned geopolitical factors. You said the US risks losing the number one position. Why do you see that in danger?
So I think drug pricing is one factor. We don't yet have a clear answer for how drug pricing regulation might come down beyond the IRA. So we have the IRA, there's already drug price negotiations ongoing that could continue to, affect pharma to some degree. The first round last year was not particularly splashy. A lot of those drugs were already heavily discounted. And so those first 10 were, I don't think, a huge hit to pharma's bottom line, but going forward, they certainly could be as we negotiate Medicare prices ahead of the loss of exclusivity. I think the threat of the most favored nation policy, again, it's just a threat and we don't know how it's going to actually come down. It doesn't seem like there's a strong legal basis for the president's threats. Obviously tariffs is one opportunity for him to kind of pull one lever. He's mentioned patents. There are potential avenues that he could take to really kind of strong arm pharma, but we don't know what those levers will be. And so um, I can't say will this happen, but if there is strong drug price regulation, that is certainly going to risk innovation here. I think also the divorce of the US from dependence on other nations, that's also a push. I think that could threaten fruitful and productive collaborations. We're looking to reshore manufacturing here, which is great, but where is that talent coming from? So much of the manufacturing talent is overseas, and we're not particularly immigrant friendly at the moment. So I think there's a lot of different factors at play here. And then again, back to the early stage research cuts. I think that, and we saw this too with Trump 1.0 when we like this was when I was back at The Scientist and I was publishing on basic science and the threat to basic science. We were out there at the marches for science when during Trump's first term. And so it seems to be consistent with his leadership that there are cuts that come down to NIH and other budgets that would really put a stranglehold on the industry's pipeline because that's where it comes from. So I think all of these factors from like drug price regulations of already marketed drugs down to like the discovery of the drugs of 30 years from now, every point of that process that like really puts the squeeze on American innovation, while these other nations are opening up opportunities for more innovative drug development, it's gonna be a power shift, I think, unless we prioritize it in some way.
Where does this notion come from in the actual administration that pharma is basically punished so hard? What has happened in the US?
This is a very interesting question. Also, one that my colleague just wrote a great story on like, why are pharma the bad guys? Why? And there's no clear answer, but it is true. Pharma are the bad guys in this. I mean, you could think of various different iterations over the years where they've been thrown under the bus. Like last year and the year before, there was a lot of talk of PBM reform. And so to avoid reform, the PBMs are saying, no, it's pharma's problem. Pharma needs to reduce prices. And pharma saying, no, it's the PBMs, right? So like there are these various battles between the different players in our healthcare system.
Mm.
And a lot of these other players want to just throw pharma under the bus. And there's maybe some reason for that. I think the salaries that pharma CEOs makes adds fuel to that fire, and certainly when you're, you know, pandering to the public, you know, the idea of an 8-digit salary is like bonkers, right? So that's hard. I think that doesn't help their reputation. But what my colleague reported in the story is like pharmas are producing life-saving medicines, and we have one of the that like early access to these drugs, some of the best healthcare in the world. So why aren't we giving pharma some of the credit? Maybe they'll take some of the blame, but also give them some of the credit. Honestly, I think that they have gotten a bad rap. I think there are problems, and we can talk about those. But by and large, I think it's an unfair reputation.
Yeah, there's always danger in every industry. I mean, also what you mentioned with the high salaries. I mean, I read about Mark Zuckerberg hiring for 1 billion. So talent, young talent.
Yeah.
I wish I had that in the 90s that someone says, Chris, work for us, 1 billion, here's the check.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I
I mean, it's
think,
certainly not unique to biopharma, like the tech industry. There are other industries where these CEO salaries are astronomical. And, you know, in some ways they're warranted. It's a really, really hard job. But then I think all of the bonuses and there's definitely criticism of compensation packages. And I think that just adds to the rhetoric of pharma being the bad guys.
yeah, and this is something I don't understand because at the end of the day, when people get sick, they're really happy about doctors,
Mhm.
therapies, medication. Um, doesn't matter how expensive it is. So when I talk with cancer patients, they don't care about money. They just want to live, and pharma provides these solutions to the patients. And without pharma, there would be nothing basically. There would be just death waiting for them, and no potential to prolong their lifespan. And still, we have a bad reputation of the industry. And I have never found out where does it come from. Why that industry? We have also other industries that are not really that have good and bad sides.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't know the answer. I don't have the magical answer for you, but I would agree. They do have this reputation and it is a bit unfair.
Yeah, and when you look at the current situation with the drug pricing of the current administration in the
Mhm.
US, where do you see the opportunity outside the United States? I mean, I ask the question because usually my recommendation to European companies was, well, you can start a biotech company here in Europe, but if you want to bring it to the market and to the patients, you need to go to the US
Right.
because only the US market is big enough, provides enough capital that you can safely develop your idea and you need to relocate to the US at the end of the day. And when you brought it to the market in the US, then you can come back to Europe. Or a big pharma company brings it then in Europe to the market. Now this is in danger. What opportunities do you see for territories outside the US?
Yeah, I think there's definitely opportunity. I think clinical trials will move outside the US more and more. So I think there's a lot
Really?
of opportunity for, yeah, for clinical ops. I think, when it comes to actual regulatory submissions and approvals, it could start to shift to, first, to file first in Europe or elsewhere. Um, again, a lot of it comes down to that uncertainty. So if some of the uncertainty gets settled and we know which way it's going to go, is it going to be more supportive? Like a lot of what the FDA administrators have said is really supportive of, especially the rare disease areas. The conditional market approval, commissioner's national priority vouchers. There's a lot that the FDA said that could foster like more staying here in the US. But then there's all the question marks and the inconsistencies that are pushing folks elsewhere. Because as we've already talked about, uncertainty is worse than a bad policy. So, um, yeah, I think there is real opportunity for other areas, other nations to accelerate and steal talent from the US. I think there's US
Still
based talent
talent.
that is looking to leave. So yeah, I think there's an opportunity across the board, honestly.
Yeah. But once the industry is gone, it's really hard to bring it back. I think you see it in the US, in other industries like smartphones, reshoring the industries when the talent is missing and rebuilding the talent base is really tough.
Yes.
Why does that not come across in the US to the decision makers? Why don't they see it?
You can't ask me to go into the minds of US decision makers right now. It's like, no, I don't think anyone can track what's going on in their minds.
Yeah, yeah.
I have a lot of questions for them if they could really start to be transparent about their thinking. And my mind, not knowing, has gone in any number of directions, from malfeasance to just ignorance. Like I don't know for some of the decisions that have then been changed. What was the thinking originally, and what was the thinking to immediately reverse that decision? Right? There's no one decision that stands out as bad,
Mm.
but the way policies are being unfolded and delivered seems unquestionably not the best, right? Like the whiplash policy making is, I think,
Yeah.
universally disliked.
Yeah, the last 5 years were challenging and it doesn't look like it's getting better. When I look at Europe, I'm not so concerned that a lot from the US will move to Europe because we still have this capital problem here in Europe.
Okay.
Um, Funding beyond Series A is really tough and we don't make it without US help. So we need US-based VCs. I'm more thinking towards further eastward, or from your perspective, probably westward, China.
China.
When we look at China, I mean, China in the last 30 years went from basically broke and bankrupt to a leading industrialized nation, to one of the leading industrialized nations. And we can have a long debate who is stronger, China or the US or Europe. But the point is that they already collaborate with Europe, they collaborate with the United States, have a lot of talent in China. And I think they are in a good position to just scoop it up and say, okay, if the US gives up on biopharma, why shouldn't we push biopharma in China? How do you see the reaction in China to the latest changes in the US?
I mean, I have to imagine they see it as an opportunity. I do know that um, Chinese biotechs have struggled, like a lot of biotechs after the pandemic.
Hmm.
And a lot of the deals that they're now striking with US and other biopharma companies are a lifeline, right? So we're seeing more and more deals come from China. That is a testament to the innovation that's going on there. But then it's also a huge boost to their biotech sector that might otherwise be struggling. So I think it is, I think it benefits the US and multinational companies that are striking those deals because they are getting access to these seemingly really promising assets that might be the future of medicine, specifically in IO that's been taking off like crazy. But it is also, every time we strike one of these deals, it's a boost to China's biotech as well. I don't think that's a bad thing, but I don't think we should not be supporting China's biotech, but I think we need to be supporting our own as China is on the rise so that we don't lose that global dominance.
I mean, I think globalization is a good move, but we saw in the during the pandemic what happens when when we are too global. and don't have core competencies in our own nations. Um, let's see how it plays out in the future.
Yeah, I think there's a push towards self-sufficiency, but that shouldn't be at the expense of collaboration.
Yeah, yeah, totally agree. How do you see the investment base in the US currently for biotechs?
A little shell-shocked, maybe. I think
Sure.
definitely cautious is still there. We're seeing a little bit of loosening of the purse strings in certain areas, but by and large, I think there's still a risk-averse investor base right now. And so companies are being forced to deliver more to get the funding they need. So they're having to do that more efficiently and more streamlined with fewer staff. So there is a shift in how the science is being done. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. Like it's not an ideal situation to be in, but it's these sort of challenging moments where capital is really constrained and you're having to find every efficiency that you possibly can, that when the economic situation loosens up a little bit, then you're set up to be extra efficient and extra productive. So I think these challenging times, and this goes for biopharma as a whole and for all other industries, including journalism, as you're forced to work with the shoestring staff and budget, you find ways, and then those ways will be to your advantage as things loosen up. So yeah, it's not great, but I think it's certainly surviving. I think there is funding out there for the biotechs that are scrappy enough and have good ideas, and there's money flowing. It's just cautiously flowing.
Yeah, we are now in the third year of survival
Yes,
mode. So
exactly. And everybody's ready to not be in survival mode. I get that, but
everybody, yeah.
we're surviving.
Yeah, for how long? For how long is the question?
Exactly. And again, anyone's guess. I don't see it happening this year, but I could not even begin to predict what 2026 is going to look like. So we'll see.
Yeah, and it always goes rapidly. I mean, like 2022, the crash was sudden. It was not something that went on for years and everybody knew that it's coming. It's just the music stopped.
Yeah.
And then suddenly the music starts playing again.
All right. Well, I'll keep listening for it.
Yeah. Um, what were the great stories of 2025 that you see on the market? Promising stories that give hope for the future.
Gosh, I'm so used to talking about the negative stories. I have to think a little bit about the positive stories. I think there there are a couple of modalities that I feel like are on the cusp and that are really going to be promising in the long term. So one of those I would point to is psychedelics. I'm personally very excited by this because I feel like mental health is an area that
Mhm.
has really stagnated and honestly never really got that far. Like there are some options for mental health, obviously, but none of them are particularly effective. Most drugs that are working for patients you're on them for a long time. They have side effects. So what I think is really exciting about psychedelics is it's so different. It's such a different approach. It's not a little tweak on this. It's not a Me Too drug that's just a little bit better, a little bit safer. It is different. This is totally different, and it has the potential to be a one and done therapy with significant benefit. So I think that's one area that's really exciting to watch. I think another area that is like really up and coming is radiopharma. The FDA just put out new guidelines for the future of radiopharma. I think there's value there. Immuno-oncology is just starting to reach its kind of new phase with Keytruda facing its patent cliff. So that's where a lot of the deals from China are coming from. So that's an area that I think is about to, um, you know, mature, right? Go from that first generation to that second generation. Um, Weight loss, I don't know if it's a promising area, but it's one to talk about as something that's changing the way the market works. It's a really consumer driven market, and that's something new for biopharma to grapple with, is pushing pharmas towards direct to consumers. um, those types of approaches. I'm sure there are others. There's a lot of interesting science, and oh, cell therapy, I would say that. So cell therapy is also going to kind of go into its next stage soon. So it's obviously kind of proven its worth in cancer, but now we're looking to autoimmune, which is an area that's really struggled. And then gene therapies are still young enough, I think, that we can talk about them getting to the point where, we've kind of sanded the rough edges, and in the future we will have these one and done life-saving therapies for a lot of diseases. And especially if we move forward with things like the platform designation, where we can create a platform for a gene corrective vector, and then we can just, once we figure out which gene needs to be corrected and swap that out with a streamlined regulatory process, then you can start to reach a lot of rare disease patients. And rare disease has historically been a really challenging area of drug development because they're rare. There's not that many patients. It's hard to put together the clinical trials. There's not a big market to go after once you do get a drug to market. So if we're able to do it in sort of this collective way, with platform therapies, then I think that's a really promising area as well.
I totally agree, especially what you mentioned about mental health. I think it's important, but they always had problems to understand how you measure that. I mean, mental health is so subjective. And I had Matthias Sereblinsky on my podcast. He runs a fund in San Francisco, and Jonathan Sporn, he's the CEO and founder of Gilgamesh Pharmaceutical. And then Jonathan Sporn signed a deal with, I think it was AbbVie, $2
Abby,
billion. Yeah,
yep.
you heard about it?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, we just covered that this week. Yeah, I mean that's a huge vote of confidence for psychedelics, especially since I think there was a
Two,
lot of hype going into the Lykos review a year or two ago with their MDMA-based PTSD drug. And so when that got rejected, it was like, oh no, what now? And maybe a little bit of rhetoric about this, falling flat on its face, but it's not. I don't think it is. It's been a really hard area to get into because these are all type 1, whatever, the most illegal drug you can have in the US, it's that one. So they've been really hard to get and to put into research. I think that those hurdles were kind of mounted about 10 plus years ago. I was back at the scientists and we were covering some of those challenges. Same with cannabis, to be honest. As that got descheduled, it became easier, but still MDMA, psilocybin, these are still schedule 1. That's what it is. It's a schedule 1 drug. And so, yeah, I feel like those barriers are being broken down, and that we'll be able to see the real potential. And in addition to potentially being very effective, I really, really like the idea of not putting patients with mental challenges on like indefinite treatment schedules. Like, just here, take this drug for the rest of your life, because we don't know what that's going to do to your body. And we know some that it doesn't have great side effects, right? But long term, we don't know what being on an SSRI will do for long term.
But at the end of the day, it gives hope. I mean, this $2 billion deal, so M&A is definitely back. I think the deal was signed in 2024, if I remember it right. Um, so there is something going on the market. It's not all dark.
Yes. Oh yeah. No, there is activity. We have seen M&As. We've seen a handful of M&As, I mentioned that intracellular one already, starting off the year, people were super excited, almost 15 billion. That's the most we've seen in a long time. But then this summer we
You're
saw a
right.
couple of $10 billion deals or thereabouts, right? So these are like double-digit billions. These are significant deals after a long drought of really nothing more than about 5 billion, all these little
Mhm.
bolt-on deals. So we're seeing some of the bigger deals come back, but we are still seeing mostly bolt-ons and smaller deals as pharma is still cautiously, moving forward, risk averse still.
So now, after this intermezzo of a little bit of happiness, positivity, and psychedelic drugs, let's go into the hard stuff. You mentioned in your
Oh yeah.
material a case, Bluebird, faced some commercial headwinds, and it's a story that teaches a little bit about resilience. What's behind the Bluebird story? Can you tell the audience what was going on?
Yeah, so Bluebird's really interesting because they have multiple gene therapies on the market, effective work, like good therapies. And naively, you might think that once you get a drug to market, you've made it. But, that's not the real finish line. And especially in gene therapy, it's a really hard space to make commercially viable because these are expensive therapies. They're one and done. So I think it's a real problem in our private payer system because no company, no insurance provider is going to want to pay $1 million+ to treat a patient when that patient is probably going to be on another insurance in a year or 2 or 3, right? I think our average turnover is only a couple of years between insurance providers. As we switch jobs, and it's a pain in the butt for consumers too, right? For patients, like getting switched doctor to doctor because they're now out of network because you switch jobs or whatever it is. So it's a challenge from the payer side and who's going to actually pay for these therapies if they're not. This is what I was talking earlier about the misaligned incentives. This is what I see as a systemic problem where the way our payer system is set up is to incentivize not paying large sums to save in the long term because there's no, but in the long term, these gene therapies will save the healthcare system millions or billions of dollars, right? Because you're not giving these patients lifetime care if you can cure them, like true cures. Like
Mhm.
this is the holy grail of medicine, and we're finally achieving it in a lot of cases, but we don't have a system set up to make these amazingly miraculous cures commercially viable. So I think Bluebird is the best example of this. They were once valued at something like 10 or 11 billion dollars, and then they just had a hard time with the launches and getting enough uptake of these approved gene therapies to make ends meet. So the company had to make the hard decision to sell, and they ended up selling to two private equity firms for something like 50 million. So a drastic reduction in valuation for that. And in terms of the therapies they have, it's a little bit uncertain what's going to happen to those, whether these private equity firms will farm them out, market them. I don't know. It's private equity is not the normal buyout for a biotech. So I think private equity is playing a bigger role these days. There are a couple of kind of innovative funding schemes that are coming back into biopharma. But yeah, I think Bluebird just really illustrates the commercial challenges and the scalability challenges in the gene therapy space, despite the scientific, you know, success story that it is.
So they brought a drug to the market. Let's stay a little bit with the story and dissect it a bit more. And you mentioned that their class of therapies is the holy grail of medicine. Why do you give it the title, the holy grail of medicine?
I just meant to say that specifically for cures. Like curing a disease is the holy grail of medicine. And gene therapies are able to do that. Some of them, right? We've had success with like tweaking the bad gene to make it a good gene, and then the patient is essentially cured. It's a functional cure. And that will eliminate a lifetime of care needed, a lifetime of care that will cost our system millions and billions of dollars. But payers are unwilling to pay one or two or three or even $4 million for these gene therapies because that's not how they're set up. Then they're out all this money, but then that patient's not even on they're not even a member in a couple of years' time. So then the next provider, the next insurance provider is enjoying the benefit of that patient having been cured and not having to pay for their constant care. But the original payer is the one who, you know, forked over the big sum. So they kind of lose out in the way that we're currently set up.
I'm not used to the US system. Why is there so much change? Why are patients switching providers?
There's so many reasons. Like so often it's because you change jobs, right? So usually our private insurance is provided through our employer. It could also, I mean, even if you're through the marketplace and paying on your own, you might go for a cheaper plan. You might, you know, find a new doctor or new specialist you like, and they're out of network, so you switch so you can get that person in network if you're prioritizing which doctor you want. So there's any number of reasons, and I can't remember where I saw that stat, so don't quote me on it. But I know there is incredibly high turnover rate of who pays, and that's where I see the misaligned incentives because if we're going to have that high
That's
turnover rate
interesting.
in who is paying, then no one payer is going to want to, you know, put out the high number on the front end to save money in the long term, right? Like if we were all on, you know, a national healthcare system, then there's no reason why the healthcare system shouldn't want to drop 4 million to save 10 million, right? But you don't want to drop 4 million if you're not going to be the one saving the 10 million, right? So that's the problem.
Yeah, now I understand. I mean, in Europe, we have national healthcare system, so it is a logical decision, basically, in my
Yes.
opinion.
Yeah.
When you have a 20-year-old patient and you can cure this patient and you have to invest 1 million and this patient, just to exaggerate it, never comes back and doesn't
Yep.
need anything in
Yep.
the future, you saved a lot of money, you get his payments, and at the end of the day, it's net positive for you. But if you don't invest it, you lose the payments and the patient because the patient might die in his 20s. So it makes sense. But when patients switch the provider every 2 years, changing jobs, getting to the next insurance, the insurance that basically invests in the patient
Yep.
sits on the cost and doesn't get any benefit.
Exactly. Exactly. So I heard talk, like we reported on this maybe a year or two ago, and one person had suggested that maybe there are payment systems that are set up for these multi-million dollar treatments. So like maybe we pay 100,000 a year for 10 plus years. And then as the patient switches, they, you know, the new payer has to pick up that cost. Something like that could work. But we also have terrible regulations about what's allowed with pre-existing conditions. So you already are in a tough spot if you have a pre-existing condition, getting an insurance plan with a low rate. What if you don't just have a pre-existing condition, you have a pre-existing payment? Like it's not even a risk that you're going to cost the insurance company money. It's a guarantee. You're going to owe 100,000 a year every year for the next, as long as I'm on this plan, right? So what is like your premium's going to skyrocket. That's the way that we're set up. And then that disadvantages the patient. So again, we're getting way outside my area here and I don't have solutions for you, but I can tell you it's a broken system.
Yeah. And what about driving costs down? I had Jason Foster from CEO of Ori Biotech on my podcast, and he said he focuses on driving the production cost down. How much potential do you see as a journalist from this movement that, especially in the cell and gene therapy space, um, company like his might succeed in driving the cost down and making it just cheaper for the patient, and that we get away from I mean, 1 million is expensive for a
Yeah.
therapy, even if it's effective. And as far as I understand, Bluebird's problem was not bringing something to the market, but rather bring it to the market under conditions that makes it logical for insurers to pay
Yeah.
for it. How do you see the potential of driving the cost down in this area?
Yeah. So you said Ori Biotech. So was that
Yeah,
Jason
yeah,
Foster you talked to?
yeah, 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 yeah.
Jason. So he was on my panel at Bio
Oh,
last year where we
great.
discussed exactly this. Yeah. So he was wonderful. We discussed so it was basically manufacturing in the cell and gene therapy space and how do we scale. And so he did bring up that exact point, which is basically there are innovations that we can put in place. Like there are innovations happening on the manufacturing side right now that will be able to lower the price point, especially of cell therapies to maybe something more palatable. But I don't think that innovations in manufacturing is going to be sufficient. I think it
Mhm.
will lower the cost to some degree. I think also there's more and more competition coming online that naturally drives down costs. I think that'll be a big factor. But I think we could do everything exactly right on the manufacturing and the scaling and all of that. And we're still going to be in a tough spot if we don't fix the payer incentives. I think that is an overhang to the American healthcare care system specifically that is not going to get solved. And or I won't say it's not going to get solved. I meant that it's not going to that will prohibit solving the price problem if we don't solve the payer problem.
And this is something that basically the administration needs to solve at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, maybe again, like we've really branched outside of Mayor. I don't know how to solve this problem, to be honest. I just see it as a real problem, especially in the cell and gene therapy space where medicines are so expensive. And it's so frustrating to watch from the biopharma side of things because we see the promise and from the science. Like back when I was in grad school, like this is something we were watching. And I reported on it in my early days of the scientist, like gene therapy. It is this miraculous thing that we've discovered with a lot of
Mm.
potential, but it is hitting like roadblock after roadblock in terms of becoming the future of medicine. And I have come to see the structure of our payer system as a big part of that.
Yeah, yeah. And this decentralization of production facilities doesn't help either. I had a conversation with investors who just didn't understand why in their hospitals they need GMP facilities and needs to pay for that, even if the drug is effective at the end of the day.
It is really hard when you've got this circular production cycle, patient to patient, like when you
Yeah,
need the
yeah.
patient's cells and then you need to work with those cells and manipulate them and add genes to them and then get them back to the patient. And every step of that process needs to be fully regulated. So I think one of the other things we touched on in that bio panel was the need for regulatory innovation. So I think that there needs to be support. So the UK is one of the first to actually move forward with decentralized manufacturing as, supported by the regulatory system there. I think we need something similar in the US. The FDA has put out guidance, but there's been no move towards actually setting up a regulatory framework for decentralized manufacturing. So if we're going to move towards like a hub and spoke model, we have to think about how that is then regulated. Yes, that's going to solve a lot of the manufacturing problems, but if each of those spokes needs to be individually inspected, then that's creating a massive regulatory problem. So then you need regulatory innovation to say, all right, I'm going to inspect this hub, and then the hub is responsible for the spokes or whatever it is. I think that was actually Jason's idea at the panel as well. And that's just one idea. But the point is that we need manufacturing innovation. And I think that will help drive down costs, but there's so much more that we need to make this a commercially viable system and bring gene therapy to more and more patients.
The more I hear about it from guests like you and Jason about this space, the more it feels to me like we are all optimists for small molecules, basically for the traditional pharma model, that you develop a drug, put it in a pill, and produce the pill somewhere in a production facility, and you just ship it out then at the end of the day to many customers. And in the CGT space, it's something completely new. This structure doesn't work,
Yes.
simply. So we need a complete overhaul of the entire industry for that specific segment.
Yeah.
Complete new regulations, complete new value chains, and rethink everything. Because when an investor outside of pharma simply looks at the industry, the first thing they look at is small molecules. And then they ask the questions, okay, but why do you need a GMP facility in this hospital? Why can't you do it like all the others?
Mhm.
And this is something hard to communicate.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly right. And that's the other bit. Another person on the panel really emphasized the conversations, the story that we tell that needs to evolve because
Mm.
these are life-saving therapies that are going to save healthcare systems gobs of money in the long term, but we're not selling that to payers. We're not selling that to investors. We've got to be clear and consistent in our messaging about why this sector should be supported. And there's a lot of good reason for it to be supported, but the conversation is so fragmented that it's not moving forward at the pace that maybe it should.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. Bluebird Bio, got private, but basically not much hope. Did you understand it right? There's not much, a lot of question marks remain.
Yeah, in terms of their therapies, I mean
Yeah.
they're done, they're sold, but in terms of their therapies and where that lands, yeah, who knows?
Should we switch to a little bit more positivity or go directly into the next drama story in pharma?
I mean, we can't not talk about Sarepta. I feel like that is definitely the story of the summer for
Go,
sure.
go
So
ahead.
unfortunately, that's another negative one, but I think it illustrates a lot of challenges in the current space, both from the company side and from the government side. So my big issue with this one was how it came out. It was this slow roll that just got more and more dramatic, and it crashed Sarepta stock for maybe good reason. So it was all about the third death, right? And this is what it was most frustrating. I wrote about this because we had written earlier in the year when those first two deaths happened. I mean, it was after the second death. Maybe it was, gosh, I can't remember what month at this point. But Sarepta was super transparent about it. They were working with the patient groups, like obviously a tragedy, but we want to move forward because this therapy is saving lives, right? Like this, they were, I felt like they played the PR game well for the first two deaths. Then there was this third death, and it didn't go well. So this death was from a limb-girdle muscular dystrophy trial. So it wasn't a Elevidys, it was an investigational therapy. And Sarepta didn't immediately disclose it to the public. They did report it to the FDA at the beginning of July. And then they had an investor call later in July to address the two Elevidys deaths, right? Not the third that was not disclosed. So they didn't even mention it on this corporate call. They talked about adding the black box label to Elevidys. They were doing this corporate restructuring. It involved layoffs. They were pivoting their pipeline and portfolio prioritization away from the AAV-based technology that they had. That was all the day before BioCentury broke the news of the third death. So the timing of it, I don't have insight into what BioCentury knew. Maybe they were working on it, and when Sarepta had that corporate call, they're like, oh man, now we've got to move on it, and they dropped it the next day. So that was bad. Corporate meeting that didn't disclose the third death, and then the third death dropping. But then to me, what makes this exponentially worse is the FDA action the next day, right? So they had, and I don't know what happened at the FDA. Another big question mark for me is, did they not see the report on July 3rd, which is what they claimed? They told Stat News that it had been lost in the bureaucracy. They confirmed Sarepta had reported the third death to the FDA on July 3rd as required, but the FDA just had missed it. So that's not great. And so the FDA, after BioSensory reported the death, then asked Sarepta to halt all shipments of Elevidys. So it seemed initially like it was just a reaction to the public outcry about the lack of disclosure from Sarepta, but then the FDA claims, no, we didn't know about it. We'd always planned to shut down, to ask for Elevidys shipments to be halted if there were a third death. We just didn't know there was a third death because we'd missed it. And honestly, I don't know which is worse. Either they knew about it and reacted to public outcry, or they didn't know about it because it was lost in the bureaucracy. Both are kind of terrible outcomes. So across the board, this saga to me illustrates, and then Sarepta refused initially to halt shipments of Elevidys, and the FDA doesn't have authority to pull a marketed drug immediately, right? There's procedures they have to go through if they do want to pull a marketed drug. So every step of this process is kind of warts on both Sarepta and the FDA. And so I just feel like this is a really, I mean, a lesson of what not, an example of what not to do in biopharma.
What can we learn from it? What can we do better next time?
Transparency. I'm all about, no, it really is. And we literally, it was my colleague who did the first one, but we praised Sarepta for how they handle those earlier deaths. Complete transparency with the public and specifically the patient community, and working hand in hand with that patient community. We talked earlier on, patients should be at the focus all the time, and they're usually not, but certainly when something like this happens, because the way this played out, it was like egg on the face of both the FDA and Sarepta. But who was hurt the most? It was the patients. There were patients who were literally waiting to get their Sarepta treatments, like had traveled to the healthcare facility, were staying in hotel rooms, waiting, and they were watching the news, looking for press releases or news to like, am I going to be able to go to the healthcare center tomorrow to get my treatment? So they're left in limbo. And there was a long period where, not long, but there was a long enough period where those shipments were halted and patients weren't able to get access before they then resumed. So I think from the company's point of view, you've got to be transparent with the public and the patient communities all the time. Don't just follow the rules. Got to submit to the FDA. Okay, did that? I'm covered. You just got to be transparent. And the same with the FDA. Like, I think if we could get a little bit more transparency from the FDA about why they were halting shipments, all shipments of Elevidys, not just those for, the non-ambulatory patients, where all the deaths occurred in non-ambulatory. Sarepta had already halted shipments of Elevidys to non-ambulatory patients after the second death, like before this whole saga broke out in the middle of summer. So there was no explanation from the FDA why they were halting all deaths when there was no reason to believe that this therapy was particularly dangerous for especially the smaller kids. Like, it's my understanding that a lot of the danger, the liver failure, came from the volume of vector they had to use. And some of these larger patients, these were teenage boys, and then the third one was a 51-year-old man. So you compare that to like a 4 or 5 or 6-year-old boy, like just their body size is so much smaller. And there's no reason to believe with a smaller amount of vector that there's been no deaths in that patient population. So we didn't have transparency from the FDA on why they were making the decision. So from both sides, I think the whole situation could have been handled so much better if there was just more transparency and more communication.
Yeah, that's a good call. I think transparency is important, honesty and transparency. How do you see the future of the company? Is it done? Is there a future?
No, I hope not. Like, I hope they're able to rebound from this. I hope they learn a lesson from this and, go back to how they handled the first couple of deaths and really are transparent. But I mean, their stock has tanked just like Bluebird. They were once valued at over 10 billion, and now I can't remember what it was latest, but like under a billion or right around a billion, I think. So it will take a lot for them to rebound. They do have a marketed therapy that seemed to be making money in Elevidys, and they've got a lot of irons in the fire with their pipeline. So I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. I don't think they're definitely, you shouldn't overlook them. I don't think they're like dead in the water, but I don't have a lot of confidence that they're gonna once rise to, the likes of what they were.
Mm. I mean, at the end of the day, every medical intervention is a risk. So what I understand from your story about the company is that a marketed drug caused some deaths. To some extent, the company handled it well, and at some point, and nobody knows why, everything became intransparent. So
Mhm.
no news on the company call. Journalists discovered something independently. The FDA was actually the same, and everything became a mess at the end of the day.
It did.
But new therapies are risky. That's the point. So
Yes.
you can't rule everything out.
But Sarepta also illustrates what we were talking about before with regard to how communication is happening. So according to the FDA, they didn't find out about the third death until BioSensory broke the news, right? And then Sarepta claims that they didn't find out about the FDA planning to request a halt to Elevated shipments
Yeah.
until media reported it. So in both cases, this really challenging, tragic situation that should have been handled with transparency, but with direct communication between the company and the FDA, instead was handled not transparently. And then when stuff started to break, it was just all communication was public. Like there was no direct communication between the company and the FDA at that point. So again, it was not well handled from either side.
Yeah, blaming is always a little bit problematic in communication in such issues.
Absolutely.
And when people start blaming each other, it doesn't go well.
No.
That's yeah. Yeah. All good dramas come in three acts. Do we have a third company?
Oh yeah, we sure do. I mean, there are a few I could choose from, but I will focus on Novavax because that'll lead us into some bigger issues. So Novavax was always kind of the trailing company in the COVID vaccine space. So they didn't make it to market in the heat of the pandemic like BioNTech, Pfizer, and Moderna did. Those, and there was also AstraZeneca in other parts of the world, and J&J even here. But really, if we're talking mRNA-based COVID vaccines, which had the vast majority of sales in the US, it was Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna. So then Novavax, which is an mRNA, I should qualify, but Novavax's COVID-19 vaccine was finally coming up for approval earlier this year. But then the PDUFA date was missed. And we didn't know, it was just missed. We didn't know what was going to come of it or if they would get approved. And then 6 weeks later, they did get an approval. And it was the first one, I believe it was the first one, Moderna came later, but it was the first one to have the new restricted guidelines, which is, the elderly population and then younger population that has is at high risk for some reason, a comorbidity that puts them at increased risk of severe outcomes from COVID. So the way that was handled in terms of the regulatory approval and the communication with Novavax was not ideal. In fact, there was a JAMA paper from a group of formula regulators who raised concerns about how that was handled and questioned whether it was a harbinger for things to come on the regulatory side. And it also, for me, really is just a great example to segue into the COVID vaccine space, which is in such disarray right now. On the one hand, we're getting some consistency from FDA action in terms of consistently approving for these high-risk groups or for the limited populations, elderly and high-risk youth. This came out was it yesterday? With all three of the seasonal updates being approved only for the limited populations, the first time that's happened. And then there are rumors, really, again, media reports that RFK and Trump may pull these vaccines from the market altogether. Obviously, we look back to June's ACIP meeting, the CDC advisory meeting for vaccines. There was a lot of discussion about COVID vaccines and mRNA safety, despite the fact that that was not voted on, because prior to the ACIP meeting, Kennedy had unilaterally changed the COVID vaccine recommendations. So COVID is such a sticky topic because it polarized Americans to such a severe degree that I think it will take us generations to recover. It put a rift in society as a whole. It put a rift into families and social groups on a smaller scale. It's very personal for a lot of people. And this conversation has become so polarized that both sides are fearful of an honest, open conversation because they worry that if they say anything that isn't, fully in step and doubling down on one extreme or the other, that the other party will take that and spin it to their own, right? So safety concerns are the number one, right? Like you've got people who believe that these vaccines have saved millions of lives and are super valuable to public health and should be available on the market to everyone. They don't want to talk about the safety risks associated with them, which are real and which are there and which are put on the labels. And then you've got the folks on the other side that thinks these vaccines are killing people, not saving people, and they don't want to have a conversation about the benefits of these vaccines because, again, it's become uncouth to have an open, honest conversation, which is the antithesis of science. This is not how science works. And it has bothered me since the days of COVID. And now with the current political rhetoric nonstop for the last 6 months, I'm honestly pretty angry and frustrated with it.
Yeah, it's understandable. Do you have a solution for that?
Um, I mean, I wish that people would have these conversations. So the ACIP met actually in April before RFK revamped it. So on RFK clean sweep, took out all the old ACIP members, stacked it with 8 and then down to 7 members of his choice, a lot of which had anti-vaccine history. So there was that whole drama this summer. But prior to that, before that happened, the old ACIP had a meeting in April and they did discuss the COVID-19 vaccines. And they all seemingly were going to, so the vote was going to happen in June, and that was after ACIP got turned over. But the
Mm.
conversation in April indicated that the ACIP would have supported a move toward risk-based recommendations from a universal. And there was one ACIP member at the time, and I wish I could remember his name because I give him a lot of credit for saying this, but he said, I'm glad that we're talking about this as a reasonable option, is essentially what he said. I'm not quoting, but like that, the way that he said that, for me, it validated the way I was feeling, which is, why aren't we having open conversations? And his sentiment was like, yeah, I'm glad we're actually talking about this. Like we've been just so, and I think a lot of it is because we already had a growing anti-vaccine segment of the American population. So that's one part of the problem. And then COVID vaccine mandates became this huge point of contention, requiring vaccines that's taking away Americans' choice. Like that was really problematic, even for people who weren't anti-vaxxers. Maybe you believe in vaccines, maybe you're going to get the vaccine yourself, but being told you have to get the vaccine, hell no, not me. I'm an American. We live in a free country, right? There was this visceral reaction from the public to the COVID vaccine mandates. And so because of that underlying anti-vaccine population, and then now the reaction to the COVID mandates, people just started grasping onto what they could, and it was the safety concerns with them, which are real, like teenage and young adult boys and men dying of like the very rare but still associated with these vaccines, myocarditis, right? So I guess, and I don't know. This is my speculation at this point, but I think that people got pissed and they started using what they could to wage war. They were waging war with COVID vaccines. And it is so upsetting to me because it is an amazing feat of biopharma to be able to respond to an emerging pandemic and create vaccines in 9 months' time that save millions of lives and allow us all to go back to our normal daily functioning. Vaccines played a huge role in that. But we can't have a real conversation about them and which patient populations should this be approved for, which patient populations should be recommended for. Like we need to be looking at the data in a very stratified way, because when you do look at kids, there's very little data support. Like kids are not at high risk, especially over the age of 2, are not at high risk for severe outcomes from COVID. So how big a trial do you need to power something that shows significantly reduced hospitalizations and death? It's got to be massive because very few kids are getting hospitalized and dying from COVID, right? So we don't have, at least we didn't when the first EUAs came out in 2021, whatever it was, we didn't have those data. And then the companies, I don't know why, the companies have not put forth more data to support these. And then at some point, and Pfizer, as recently as yesterday, these EUAs for kids were converted to full approvals. So and now with restrictions. So I guess you've hit on we've gotten to the part where you can tell I'm a little bit passionate, and there's so many directions we could take this. But I think that this is a place where we have failed as a scientific community and as a society to come together and have reasonable conversation. It is the most polarized topic in our society, and it has led to horrific consequences, from like actual violence, the CDC shooting on August 8th, tied to this drama, this societal drama even, right? It's not even specific to science, it's society. To now regulatory restrictions that may or may not be warranted, and without real discussion, it's hard to really parse that data.
Why have we lost this ability to to discuss about the good and the bad sides, about safety and efficacy, about patients? This is something that I don't understand until today. what happened in 2020 that when I tried to discuss in spring 2020 about safety risks and about a risk assessment of the situation, it was basically like talking to a religious group. Uh, when I was talking to the one side, I was not allowed to push certain narratives, and to the other side, the same.
Yep.
What happened in spring 2020, in your opinion, that we created this rift, and how can we mend it?
I think the government tried to control too much instead of just giving recommendations and options and really positive, helpful public
Mhm.
health messaging. They started issuing mandates, right? And this
Mhm.
this is largely local governments. So I'm not like blaming that throwing the federal government under the bus. There was some level there, but Americans don't like to be told what to do. I mean, no one does, but I'm going to speak to the population I know best. Americans do not like to be told what to do. And when a global pandemic, a pandemic is global, hits, there is tension between personal rights and public health responsibilities of societies. And this is now branching into an area of ethics that I do not have any expertise in. I don't know what is the right answer, but I do believe that is the core of why society started to get so incredibly divided. Some people were like, yes, thank you, government. We need to do everything we can to protect the population as a whole. I'll get my vaccine, even though I'm not high at risk. We want to protect everyone. This is a public health emergency. And then you have the other people who are like, you don't tell me what to do. I'm not putting that in my body. I don't know enough about it. I'm not going to get sick from COVID. I'm good. Right. And so there was just this dramatic division of society. And I'm not saying either one of them's right or wrong. I think there's arguments to be made. Like there's and there never is when there's such polarization. If there is going to be a right and a wrong, it's going to be some kind of happy medium. And the happy medium was just like you said, off the table. You can't discuss it. And so we just dug our heels in further and further. And I got frustrated in the moment in COVID because I did feel like I was more in the middle. I did feel like I'm a scientist. I am, pro-vaccine. I believe in the value of science. I think these things are doing great. But when it came to vaccinating my kids, I was digging into the data and I was a little skeptical that there was enough to convince me that this was really going to benefit her and that it was going to be safe in the long term because we don't have long-term safety data yet. So as a parent, and I don't judge anyone who made either decision, but as a parent, we were put in a really tough position of assessing the risk benefit ourselves. And without open, honest conversation between the powers that be, scientists, public health officers, CDC advisors, everyone, I didn't trust the recommendations that were just given because I felt
Mhm.
like even the government was forced to be polarized to try to bring and it does and I don't know why that they thought that would work because the harder you dig into one side, the farther you're going to push the other side away. You're not going to actually pull them in, right? So I mean, it was just terribly handled across the board. So I do think it touched a nerve with Americans. Like you threatened our freedom.
Yeah, the same in Europe. Same
Yeah.
happened in Europe. We lost the middle ground. The middle ground was an empty place
Yeah.
during the pandemic, and still today. Every situation that I see now, I mean, before 2020, we had tough situations to handle, but there was always this middle ground. People came together, discussed the pros and the cons, made a decision,
Yes.
moved forward. And in
Yes.
2020, it stopped, and now it's pretty much the same. It doesn't matter if it's terrorism, if it's economics, if it's politics, if it's corporate issues. There are always these two opinions and nothing in between anymore. In COVID, it was either you're a vaxxer or you're an anti-vaxxer. And when you're
Mm-hmm.
in between, you're nobody. So this is.
That's exactly what it is. And like I said, I feel like I'm in the middle because I'm a vaxxer. I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I'm definitely a vaxxer,
Mhm.
but I had questions. And that I was fearful of expressing those questions because I thought I'd be labeled as an anti-vaxxer, which I'm
Mhm.
so far from, right? So that's the best way to put it. There was no middle ground. And those that felt like they were middle ground were incredibly lonely and isolated.
And as you said, we need to come back to this middle ground because currently society is getting more and more hostile. And you see it with rising crime rates also in Europe, and this can become a problem. But maybe we bring the conversation back to media and journalism.
Sure.
And some happy news. We didn't discuss BioSpace so far. Just looked at my list and what's BioSpace? Tell me more about it.
Sure. Yeah. BioSpace, I mean, we've been around for 30 some years. We're historically a job board, but we are,
Really?
oh
A
yeah, oh
job
yeah.
board?
That's BioSpace's origin story. So and we still are a job board, but we are so much more than that now. So in the last 5+ years, they started doing news. So prior to that, even we started aggregating press releases and being more of a news source in that sense. But in the last handful of years, we've started doing journalism, actual reported or, written news by editors and journalists. So this has been a kind of a, starting a news desk is a hard undertaking. And, we had our challenges over the years, but I've been here now for 2.5 years, and I feel like we're running on all cylinders. We have a great team now, a stable team, all four of us. So me and my three editors, we're still tiny, but I feel like we're making a mark, and I feel like there's a lot of space in biopharma for good journalism. It's really quite a small community, which has been one of the challenges for me growing this team. Like, where do I actually hire someone with biopharma journalism experience? There's really no option other than a handful of competitors, direct competitors. So yeah, my main goal is to add to the conversation, right? I want to put out unique, exclusive content, deep dives, data analyses, reported pieces, editorials, opinions, things that are hitting on all the hot topics that you're going to see in our competitors and the general media, but adding value to that conversation, bringing numbers or different perspectives to it to help inform a deep and rich conversation about these issues.
You started as a job board and then transitioned to editorial content, news publications, basically.
Exactly.
What sparked this decision? I mean, it's unique from going from a job board to more journalism. What sparked this decision?
You'd have to ask the CEO, Josh Goodwin. He may have some answers for you. I will say, I do know that it has continued to be a priority for the company to build our editorial
Mm.
branding because it adds a very unique revenue stream. So purely a job board, the revenue will be more dependent on the job market, of course, right? So our payment model is companies will pay us to advertise their jobs. So in a currently depressed labor market where companies are laying off people and not so much hiring, that revenue stream will dip. So growing an editorial brand, in addition to brand recognition and gravitas and everything else that comes with it, it also gives us a new revenue stream because we can sell media ads against our content that readers want to see. And we also now do custom content for clients. We do webinars and podcasts and events, like all these things. That's yet another revenue stream. So I think that the company is really actively growing to be more well-rounded as a thought leader in the biopharma space so that we can continue to grow even as the labor market ebbs and flows as it does naturally.
And your role is managing editor, and I always was curious to understand the role better because I mean you have many ideas from your team, and at the end of the day, it's your call, your decision, what goes online, what gets published, and what not, and you can raise your thumb or turn it down, like in Rome, in ancient Rome. What are your decision criteria? What stories do you favor over others? How do you do that?
Yeah, well, first I'll say it's definitely a group decision-making process here. I really do value the input from my team members. So I try not to make any unilateral decisions. But you're right. And at the end of the day, I kind of do have veto power if I think something is inappropriate or whatever it might be. In terms of those decisions, though, I think, we're constantly looking to our readers. So as a journalist, as an editor, my remit is to serve the reader. So what will be of value to our readers? And so one obvious metric for understanding our readership is what's getting the clicks. What is people reading? With a grain of salt. Like, we'll write stories about obesity and the oral obesity market, and those will go gangbusters, but we're drawing in a much broader population there, like the general consumers who are interested in these drugs for themselves. That's not our core audience. So I, kind of take everything with a grain of salt. But by and large, looking at the numbers to understand which stories are doing well and which stories aren't, to understand what our audience is most eager to see. So our main remit is kind of the business of biopharma. So we kind of have a couple of different beats. One of my editors heads up the biopharma executive beat. That's more pure business, what's going on with the M&As and the IPOs and the licensing deals and the executive suite, what's going on from like a leadership perspective in biopharma. And then we have our clinical space beat, which is more on clinical trial readouts and regulatory things. But again, all of it's with under this overall umbrella of how does this affect the business and the strategies that are being employed. And then we recently started up a manufacturing beat as well. So we're getting more and more into the manufacturing space. We've always covered it to some degree, but we're putting a little bit more of a focus there. It certainly is becoming more a part of the narrative, especially under the Trump administration with the tariffs and the reshoring. And then also just with the evolving science and the novel modalities, cell and gene therapy, like manufacturing is more and more a part of the conversation under the business of biopharma. So the science is there, but now we need the manufacturing to make it kind of a more viable industry. So yeah, I think the decision of whether or not to cover it is whether it's interesting, like whether it's a late enough stage to really kind of tip the scales on the stock market or a big enough deal or that sort of thing. And then another factor that I really value is what can we add? So if we don't have any analyst notes on it, or we don't have anybody who's willing to give us some commentary on it, I might pass on that story. Like, okay, we could like summarize that press release, but if we don't have anything to add to the press release, people can read the press release if they want that news. What I really want to bring is added value. So I want that analyst commentary. I want, the regulatory commentary. I want to be able to unpack some of these things that are happening. What is it going to mean for this company? What is it going to mean for the market as a whole? What is it going to mean for this modality? Those are the sorts of questions that I want to be able to put out content that helps people who are interested in this particular space answer.
That's a good move. That's a good move. I mean, with your content, you are probably an interesting medium for analysts. Many of the pharma companies and biopharma companies are public companies. How does your team feel when they say, okay, when we publish this, we probably influence the stock price at the end of the day? What does it do behind the scenes with your team? How much thought do you put into this? What ripple effects your stories can cause on the market?
On a like story by story basis, none. Like I do not consider that as I'm publishing. That is not relevant. But on a higher level, recognizing that we do have an influential role, it makes my priority of accuracy like all the more important. It's always our priority as journalists to be accurate and balanced and factual, all those things. But what you're describing of a potential influence of how a company performs on the stock market, that just makes it all the more important. Like we don't want to blunder, put out something that is an error, cause that stock to crash, and then have to issue a correction, and then that stock doesn't fully rebound because nobody goes back and looks at the correction, right? Like we can't have that happen. So it definitely puts a little bit more pressure on just our journalistic ethics as a whole, to make sure that we're following, dotting all our I's, crossing our T's before we put stuff out there into the ether.
I think this is an important distinction between social media and real journalism. Social media is often claimed as the new media, and we don't need traditional media anymore. When someone with 500 followers posts something and a day later learns, oh, I was wrong, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
But you, as a journalist with your team, with BioSpace, you are the go-to place for investors. And the stories that you put out on the market really move then the stock price, and not only the stock price, but also decisions on board level. And decisions on board level then move the healthcare system. And when the healthcare system moves, then the patient gets a drug or doesn't get a drug at the end
Yeah.
of the day. And I think this level of accuracy is what is the huge difference between real journalism and social media posting.
I would agree. And I would say even within real journalism, you have a range, right? And so that's a distinction between good journalism and bad journalism. And that's out there too.
And how can we improve that? That we get more good journalism, because I think we need it these days.
I
Really,
agree. I
people.
do think we need it. Um, yeah, I don't know. Let's see.
I was
I think,
hoping.
yeah, it is hard because I don't feel that journalism is valued the way that it used to be by the general news consumer. But perhaps in today's age of misinformation that and AI, that might become more valued again, I could hope. Um, Yeah, I would have to give that a little more thought. I don't have specific ideas for how we can improve the state of journalism. I'm really very focused on making sure we, BioSpace, are good and putting out good journalism into the conversation. I actually did an editorial earlier this year, kind of ranting about another outlet that I felt was very skewed. It was all related to this COVID and the ASIP stuff. And I was a little bit frustrated by the nature of the story, which wasn't inaccurate, but was misleading and skipped over some facts, like the fact that the ACIP had recommended moving toward a risk base from a universal COVID vaccine recommendation. So I do feel like even among the good outlets, there are not great stories. So I think that also a lot of it falls to the consumer. I think as a news consumer, you need to be super critical of the news that you're reading, and you need to not take anything at face value. And as you start to be a more critical consumer of news, you will start to see which outlets are the ones that are more reliable and go
Mm.
back to those outlets and disregard the ones that you find are more skewed or more inaccurate. So I think a lot of it just falls to the public to kind of just to set up these incentives and these values.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a maturity question. And I think behavior changes. When I think back to the advent of social media when it began, 2006, there was basically nothing. Then we had a lot of credible stories on social media until about 2020, and then social media really took off and took over during the pandemic. And now there is so much misinformation on the market and people blaming each other who puts out the misinformation.
Yeah.
Uh, Low quality stories, a lot of artificial intelligence stories, a lot of social media ranting and posting. And the interesting thing for me is quality now stands out. When I get a lot of noise on the Twitter or X feed, quality really stands out. When you get a good article, well written, well researched, it stands out. And what I realized in this year is my willingness to pay grows. So when I see a good news outlet, I'm these days much more willing to pay for that than I was 10 years ago. Because,
Yeah.
okay, well, everything is on social media anyways, but now there's just noise. And I think this is the interesting contradiction. The more noise on social media, the more I am willing to pay. And I think other people change too, probably with their
Yeah,
behavior.
no, that's interesting. And I see it even in our numbers of the stories we put out. So we also do aggregate news, which
Mhm.
is just a quick write-up of the news that broke. We want to get it out there quickly. We can usually grab some analyst notes to provide that value that I prioritize. But then you compare how those stories perform to how our deep dives and our analyses and our reported pieces do. And those, the latter, the more exclusive pieces are they perform much better. So I do feel like there is an appetite for this. I think across the board, like I said, even in our aggregate news, we want to be accurate. We want to be adding value. We want to be adding different perspectives. And so there's still value there, but I want as much as I can to be pushing more and more towards, full on reported data analyses, deep dives, the stuff that you're not going to be able to find anywhere else.
We need to get away from this for free thinking in the economy. Definitely. If something is good, people need to pay. Otherwise, they lose it. And
Yeah.
this core principle of the economy needs to come back. And we lost it a
Okay.
little bit. I just looked at the time. I mean, it's really fun talking to you. Do you have a couple of minutes more? We are over 2 hours. So,
Yeah. No, I don't have a hard stop. So if you have any more
yeah, yeah,
questions, throw
yeah.
them at me.
Oh, I have some questions. I can do another 10, 15 minutes, 20 minutes if you want to. Yeah,
Sure.
that's
Let's
great.
go.
What I'm hoping with our conversation is that some young scientists now get a perspective of becoming a journalist and say, okay, if I'm not so much into academia, then maybe journalism is my way to go. But then the question is, I think these days, probably for the young generation, artificial intelligence, social media, there's so much noise on the market. What skills do you think should they sharpen these days to have a good career in journalism in 10 years?
So writing, for one, scientists are not trained to write. And with the type of writing they do, they're actually being
Really?
trained
It,
oppositely. Yeah. So, I mean, you have to write as a scientist, but you
Mhm.
don't take classes in writing. So you don't learn the different types of writing. And in fact, the one type of writing you're learning, how to write journal articles about your research, is almost the exact opposite of journalism from a like overall structural level to like actual tense and voice. Like you can think about if you're reading a scientific article, it was found that six mice did that, right? It's very passive, very removed of all human presence. Journalism is active voice. I did this, she did that, right? It's very active voice and telling the story in a way that is engaging because everyone knows it's really hard to read scientific articles because they're so boring and so dry. And you don't want your writing to be like that if you want to be a journalist and you want to be widely read. So
Yeah,
you
yeah.
need to learn how to write in a fun, engaging, active voice. So I think writing skills is number one. But then number two, and almost as important, is finding the stories. Because to be able to break into science journalism, you got to be able to land some pitches. And editors are flooded with pitches. We don't want to see them, especially bad ones. We're busy enough. So if you really want to get an ear of an editor, or if you want to get your story published in a reputable outlet, you have to have a unique and interesting story angle. And so like it's a little more amorphous of a skill, but sussing out those story angles is a skill that you need to hone as well.
How can people learn that? What's your advice to them?
Do it, practice. I mean, I think like anything,
That's
it's
all.
just yeah, it really is. So when I was in grad school and discovered this cool idea of science writing, I immediately started a blog and I just started doing it. I started writing. Nobody's paying me to do it. Nobody's telling me I can't do it. It's just no filter, just put it up there. Then I started pitching. I got my first couple of pieces placed in the school newspaper. If you're still a student, even a graduate student in science, write for your school newspaper, your school magazine. Like these are really easy entry places. You'll start working with an editor for the first time. You'll understand just the basics of how publishing works. Like that's just a basic knowledge you need to have going into this career. And then, there are other kind of low level is not the nicest way to put it, but more entry level publications like alumni magazine. So one of my first paid piece, for example, was a profile that I did of a professor at Indiana University where I was a graduate student, and I pitched it to his alumni magazine. I think it was in Texas, some university in Texas. I pitched it and they paid me like $250 for it. And I was blown away. I was like, oh my gosh, I just made $250, right? So that's the first way to get your name in print beyond a blog, which I do recommend, but get your byline out there and start to build a portfolio. Because once you go to apply for internships or a job, you need some level of journalism experience to start working in journalism. It's kind of this catch-22. You want to break into journalism, but if you don't have any journalism experience, you're not going to be able to. So you've got to kind of just be scrappy in the beginning and build up a small enough portfolio. And I literally had like a dozen stories and I put them all in, page protectors and in a little binder. And I went to an internship fair and I handed them out. And I was like, look, I have a portfolio. And I, luckily enough, landed an internship at the Scientist. And then, within 2 months' time at the Scientist, I had a portfolio of 50 articles. So then I was competitive. But even to get that first internship, you need something.
So the Mark Manson way basically works still in 2025. I think he started a blog 15 years or so ago, then got the signal from the market, which stories are good, compiled it in a book, published a book, and became famous with his book. So this
Who
is
was that? I missed it. Who'd you say?
I think Mark Manson, isn't it? Mark
Oh,
Manson is the
interesting.
guy
Okay.
who wrote this book. Salada,
Okay.
giving
Okay.
a fuck. I think he
Love
started the
that.
blog, and which one the second? The second was this one. Seth Godin is also he started blogging,
Okay.
blogging daily, and this is the same what you did then. Start a
Yeah,
blog, start writing.
exactly.
But then I can imagine, I mean, when young people or non-writers look at the internet, then they find your article and you have a lot of experience and you wrote and you write daily and you're an editor and you know how to write, and then compare it with the first output. How can you motivate them to go public, to put it on a blog, on the internet when they say, okay, I see the difference. There's quality and it's me. And it's not that good, basically, after lacking 5, 10, 15, 20 years of experience. What's your motivation and what's your pep talk to them to do it anyways?
I mean, if you have something unique to say, it doesn't have to be perfectly said. So as long as you're writing a story with a unique angle and unique, information to share, don't stress about it being perfect and the most eloquently crafted. And it's not, and that's the other thing too with the blog, you're not edited. And so it will be rougher. My own blog post would be rougher than my edited published pieces, right? And that maybe a little scary, but it's also really valuable as you start applying to jobs because editors will look at your blog and they know what you sound like unedited. They know how hard to edit you're going to be. So self-edit, I always recommend self-editing, but do put yourself out there, even if it is a little rough around the edges. More important is that you have something unique to say.
How do people find a unique angle?
My best my best advice there is to report, like get on the phone with people, talk to people, because that's the other huge skill in journalism that scientists don't have is interviewing. You need to be able to ask the right questions, catch the right sound bites, take the notes. I mean, it's a little bit simpler now with AI transcription all over the place. I had to get proficient at talking and typing as fast as the other person was talking as they went. But yeah, that's where you're going to get something unique as you talk to one or two or three people about maybe a scientific study or a current event or something that's happening. And then you're hearing these different perspectives. And then you as the journalist are making the connections and connecting the dots and finding the trends and finding the unique angle. And so three people said slightly different things, but they all hit on this one point that kind of illustrate that's the unique angle. There's your angle. What is that kind of common theme? And then in your story, you would provide the nuances and the difference between your different sources. But you, as the journalist who had the idea and talked to these people, are the only one who is able to connect those dots. So bringing in more perspectives and then you being the synthesizer of those perspectives will give you a unique angle.
That's interesting. And they can also play around with social media at the end of the day. I mean, these days you can
Absolutely.
also write short story pieces. It must not be 4,000 words. You can put 100 words, go to a conference, post about it. It brings followers. How important are followers for you these days when people apply for a job at BioSpace?
Um, I would say for me personally, it's not hugely important. It is a value, but I am much more focused on other things, like how well do you know the industry? How well do you write? How much of a team player are you? That sort of thing. Followers specifically are helpful for marketing your material. And also what I have found is my network has really grown over the last few years here is it's exceedingly helpful to have a good network to bring in story ideas.
Mhm.
So now when I go to LinkedIn, I get story ideas just as I'm scrolling right off the bat. Whereas a few years ago, I didn't. I had a much more science journalism heavy network than now I'm much more biopharma focused. And so I think that's an asset for coming up with ideas. We at BioSpace don't really have a shortage of ideas. We have a shortage of bandwidth and resources to produce all the ideas we want. So if I were to hire a new staff writer, for example, I wouldn't prioritize your ability to bring me ideas because I got plenty of ideas. I just need like fingers on keyboards working on them.
Yeah, there was an idea inflation during the pandemic. Now with social media, it's an overflow of ideas
It is,
sometimes.
yeah, which is a good thing. I love it. There's plenty of angles that you can find to pursue and get a few more perspectives on and make your mark.
How do you stay focused when there are so many ideas on the market? I mean, when I 5 years, 6 years ago, finding guests for a podcast was a hard work because nobody was on social media, so I needed to go to a conference and convince people. Now I'm flooded with information about people. Everybody posts, and sometimes it feels there's an information overload. How do you stay focused in with BioSpace, with your work, that you don't get in this resistant space where you say, okay, there's so much ideas and I could write about this and write about that and do that and this and this and this and that. At the end of the day, you need to write a story. How do you do that to stay focused and not get lost in an idea space?
I think you just have to triage, right? So we have all these ideas and we have weekly meetings and we discuss and we're like, that one's timely for this reason, or this development just happened. That makes it even more timely. Let's move forward with that. And once we make that decision, you pursue it until you get something out there, right? So you get a couple folks on the phone, you dive into some of the data, whatever it is, and you put that out there. So I think but we also keep all of the ideas in the idea pool there to turn back to. And then as we triage and as we prioritize the ones that are most timely and most important and most interesting to us in that moment, and then we go back to the pool, some of the ones in the pool look less interesting than they did a week or two ago, or that's kind of over, or that like decision was completely reversed. So that's a moot idea. So like some of them kind of get washed out as new ones come in. So the pool is kind of a little bit of a tide pool, water in, water out. It's always flowing. And then we just, pick up one up at a time or two up at a time and pursue them and put them out there. So there's no, and sometimes it's hard to make a decision, but like if it's hard to make a decision, there's no wrong answer. If they're both that interesting, either one will be interesting to put out there. So, like I said, we're a team of four. We're not going to ever be able to produce all the content that we want to. So, you just have to live with some of those ideas never getting done.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but it's reality. So when someone wants to work with you and for you, just bringing ideas is not enough. This is a commodity these days. What you want to see is show me your blog, show me your community, show me what you post, and that you can write a story. And at the end of the day, that you're also a team player. So it's not the journalism are these lone wolves out in the wilderness, white writing a story every other week and mostly work alone. You want a team player.
Yeah. And I will add network to that. Like, I think personal network is a big deal to be
Mm.
able to say, like, I have access to these people and I can get them to comment on these things. But to me, that network is different than your social media network. Like, you can have 1,000 followers and not a single one that you've ever spoken to personally. I'm much more interested in who do you have a personal relationship with, because that's where you're going to get unique story ideas that we couldn't get elsewhere.
What's your advice to CEO and investors? I also still perceive our industry a little bit as media averse and rather working in the lab. What's your pep talk for CEOs? Why should they engage more with media and get the stories out on the market?
Oh, I think media it plays a huge role in a company's well-being. I think you want not just positive puff pieces either. Like you want real stories, real um like challenging conversations that you can be a part of, right? So I think by default, companies tend to want that company profile or that CEO profile, and their PR people are like, yeah, of course you can, right? But then they also want to review it and make sure you didn't say anything bad. And that's not journalism. You're not going to review my piece before it goes live. That's if you want to pay for a sponsored piece, I can connect you with the folks that, that in that
Mm,
department. But I think what PR people and CEOs can overlook is that just weighing in on an issue that is relevant to your company but isn't about your company, that kind of visibility, speaking up, speaking honestly, being accessible for these bigger picture conversations, that's where I think it's really valuable to talk to the media.
but doesn't that go against the nature of PR, the standard PR training, which is more narrative controlled than being honest and open?
Probably. I think you're right. I think that's why PR is generally more hesitant. PR also, as an industry, seems like they want control. And media is not going to give up control. Good media brands are not going to give you any level of control. So I think it would behoove the PR industry to recognize that yes, you can do controlled marketing and you can pay for those opportunities, but true media, true journalism, you also want a presence there. And you're going to
Mm,
have to give up some control, but there's value there as well. And I think the value there is more on the side of your company weighing in on issues that are relevant to broader sects of the society, to broader areas of the industry than just you, right? Because it's all those are the types of stories that are also going to get a lot more eyes. A lot more people are going to read about how is the industry reacting to this latest FDA guidelines or to this latest change at the CDC, right? And you've got CEOs weighing in on that. A lot of people are going to read that story compared with, here, I did a profile of Novavax, check it out, right? Like you'll get some eyeballs on that, but you're going to get a lot more eyeballs on the more comprehensive feature stories.
mm.
And that is where you can set yourself apart as a company that is present, active in the industry, and transparent in their communication. This just it all comes back to transparency. If you're willing to speak with a journalist, then that says a lot about you as a company.
Yeah, totally agree. Totally agree. And also, I think investors, doesn't matter if it's public market investors, private market investors, they want to see the leader who stands out and stands up and can control not the narrative, but can direct the chaos and can be open, honest, and transparent and does understand without over controlling the situation, how to lead and shows the leadership. This is a
Yeah,
strong point for media and working with media.
absolutely.
When we look at the future of biospace, last part of the conversation, Where do you see BioSpace in 5 to 10 years?
I see us as a known entity in biopharma, and ideally with some brand recognition beyond just our industry. I think we already are pretty well recognized in the industry, and
Mhm.
that's a testament to the content the team is already producing. But if we want to compete with Bloomberg and the Wall Street Journal and the New
Mm.
York Times, that's where, and not compete directly. Those are different, those are whole different business models. But if we want to um, break the level of stories that those big national newspapers can break, we just need to grow in our reputation and our staff size and our network size so that when somebody at the FDA has a juicy tidbit that they want to leak, they leak it to BioSpace. They don't leak it to the New York Times, right? Those are 10-year goals. If we can get people in the industry coming to us with the scoops before they go to the big national newspapers, that's like my biggest stretch goal. Already, though, I feel like we've pretty well established ourselves within the biopharma space with our direct competitors. We're well known by the other media outlets and the companies. You know, when companies are looking for publicity, I feel like they're coming to us as much as they are to our direct competitors. So that's great. Like I feel like that's step one. But step two is like really engendering the trust of the whole industry such that you are the trusted source they go to when they have something super juicy.
No, I like this vision. Let's push Wall Street Journal and New York Times off the market and
No,
BioSpace.
no, we still need them because I'm not going to be writing about all the end industries. We're still biopharma focused, and so there's
So you
value there. But if we can become as big as them when it comes to biopharma news, I would be happy.
so you don't want to become the everything space. You want
No,
to
I
stay in
don't.
you want to stay in
No.
biopharma. What I never understood with our industry is this reluctance of media presence. When you look at SaaS and artificial intelligence and the entire Silicon Valley tech bubble, they are all narrative driven. They know how to play with media. They know that they need to put money behind it and create their own media outlets and just push the narrative on social media and into media. Why is pharma so reluctant to do that? What's your opinion on that? I mean, there's a difference between tech, Elon Musk level tech or Mark
Mm.
Andreessen level tech. When you look at our VCs and our entrepreneurs, they are silent. They are too silent, in my opinion. Where does this come from?
It's a good question. I hadn't really thought about it in that way, so I don't have an immediate answer for you. But my first thought is it comes back to that reputation of pharma as bad guys. They might be a little bit gun shy to speak for fear that it would get spun as pharma's the bad guys, maybe a little bit of distrust of journalists. Um, and I can't think, of an example in history where, a media outlet has really burned a company, but I mean, I'm sure it exists, or at least there's the perception that, and maybe it's just that lack of control because I think that it is recognized that when you start working with true journalistic outlets, you do give up a level of control. And there is something, you're right, about biopharma that it does seem like they're even more controlling of the narrative than some other industries. And maybe it's because it's just such a high risk environment. Like one bad bit of publicity can derail a clinical program or something like this. Maybe it's just too risky and they're risk averse. I don't quite know, but I do agree with you that there's some sort of like rigidity in opening up to the media public. And like so for example, like we wrote to a company just yesterday, I won't name names, but we wrote to a company to ask them to clarify some clinical trial results that were a little bit conflicting. And the response was, you can find the results for this trial here, link to press release. You can just find the results to this trial here, link to press release. Have a
Mm.
good day, right? I was like, yeah, no, I know. I was looking at those press releases. That's what my question was about. And they refuse to, like, they work so hard on those press releases to say exactly what they want to say. And then they often don't say anything beyond it. So, yeah, there's definitely a little bit of control freak to it.
I think the perception of biopharma would potentially probably be different if we had personalities like Janssen, Elon Musk, Mark Andreessen, Tim Cook, who are much more outgoing. who are much more narrative driven. I think in the other industries, it's just a few personalities who love to work with media, and this simply paints a different color around the entire industry. And we need that in biopharma.
But I
Just
wonder if boards would accept because those splashy personalities, they make some missteps and they say some bad things and they get some bad publicity. And I wonder how tolerant pharma boards would be to that sort of, again, lack of control. If they can't control their CEO and what their CEO is going to say, I don't know.
but they deliver $4 trillion companies. So
Yeah.
Nvidia, 4 trillion, Apple, I think it's three something, Microsoft, Nadella, 3 billion something, Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook, Meta with all the
Yep.
mishaps,
Yep.
2 trillion, 1.5 or something. I don't have the latest figure in mind, but Mark Andreessen, A16Z, Andreessen Horowitz, the fund on podcasts all the time. Even your president, Donald Trump, um, podcasts. I think this is the future. But
Yeah.
if we don't do it in pharma, I think it will just become a tiny industry. This is just we need to do it. We need to learn it.
I'd be on board if pharma companies were more open to talking with us. That'd be great.
Then let's bombard them and get them on board. Get them on
Right.
board. When we look at the future on biopharma, besides media, what's your perspective? Where do you see pharma in 10 years? Biopharma.
See, this is what I really don't know, and I really want a crystal ball here because I feel like there are some really critical pivot points that we're at right now. And until I see how those play out, I couldn't even begin to predict what it's going to look like in 10 years. So, like, I could give a couple of examples for what it could look like in 10 years. I think in 10 years, it could be that cell and gene therapy are, a regular part of medicine, and the new versions of these are up and coming. Same with other, novel modalities like radiopharma and, the next generation of IO and psychedelics and some of those other ones I mentioned, and there are plenty more. So like I feel like we're at a real exciting point with regard to the science that if all the other factors align, we could see a whole new generation of medicine in 10 years' time. And if we have the regulatory frameworks to support those paths to market, if we have the business incentives aligned, all of that, the science is poised to just wow us. Like we are, it's there. There's so much exciting science going on. On the other hand, if the business incentives aren't aligned, if the regulatory uncertainty persists, if are other policy-based restrictions to collaboration or pharmacy, or sorry, not pharmacy, pharma revenues or anything like this, something that restricts the full potential of science, we could see the US barely keeping up, if keeping up at all, with some of the other countries around the world in terms of not only developing these medicines, but getting them to patients and getting them to patients first. Like we could have a reversal back to when Europe used to see the medicines before we did. And that used to happen. And then we
Yeah.
instituted PDUFA. We got more money to support the regulatory processes. So we could actually accelerate drug review times. And now US is almost always the first ones to see these drugs. But that's not guaranteed in the future. If we don't keep incentivizing that, we will lose it.
Yeah, it boils down, I think, to one question. Do you want to have safer and more effective drugs on your market than lead like in other areas? If not, then you can become the second Europe and you see what happens.
Yeah.
And you are not the first place anymore.
Yeah. I think everyone would answer the first to that, but I don't think everyone would agree on the potential impact of some of these other factors right now, right? I think that some of these factors right now could derail our progress or accelerate it. And I think that's where the disagreement, everybody wants to be the best and the most innovative, but I don't think everyone agrees on how to get there.
Mm. Let's see how it plays out. Jeff, amazing conversation. 2.5 hours, and it's 8:30 here in Austria, and I'm losing my focus. I would love to go on another 3 hours with you. It's really fun talking with you, and you have a lot to say. Keep up your great works and motivate people that they get more into media and that we keep pushing the entire industry forward.
Absolutely. I really enjoyed it as well. Thank you so much for the invite and for all of your great questions. It's been wonderful.
Yeah, let's catch up in a year or so and enjoy your day.
Same to you. Thank you.
See you.